Good morning. I'm going to call to order this public workshop, joint workshop with the Board of County Commissioners of New York County and the Planning and Zoning Commissioners of April 19th, 2010. Would everyone please rise, and Commissioner Fletcher will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our great nation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah. Thank you. Let me just take a minute here, and I would like the Chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Mr. Hamner. Why don't you go ahead and introduce everybody here? Oh, I'm sorry, you're correct, yeah.
We have with you all today the Planning and Zoning Commissioner, most of us, TRIC. We've got Donna Cox, Greg Smith, Jen Scripson.
Donna Cox.
Greg, would you take over?
We're gonna do a do-over. We're gonna start this thing over.
In as much as one quick statement for y'all, I know this is a workshop. If y'all just accept what we did in our meeting, we can get out of here.
So move.
Is that a motion? I hear a second.
I'm sorry, Donna Keys, our
Vice Chairman.
Your mic's not on anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Well, welcome to y'all. I guess we'll go ahead and jump right into it. And with that, Bob Keating. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Bob Keating. I'm County Community Development Director.
And a PowerPoint.
And I do have a PowerPoint.
Let me give you my surprise face.
Today we're here for a workshop on the evaluation and appraisal report based amendments to the comprehensive plan. And the primary purpose of the workshop today is to introduce the Board of County Commissioners to the draft EAR-based comprehensive plan amendments so that it'll be easier when these EAR-based amendments come to the board in a transmittal public hearing in May. Another purpose today is to highlight some of the major policies and the policy changes that are part of the EAR-based amendments. Also, today is an opportunity for the Planning and Zoning Commission to advise the Board of County Commissioners on these EAR-based amendments. And finally, today's an opportunity to get some more public input. You're going to see as we go along, there's been a lot of opportunities for public input during the entire process of the EAR-based amendments, but today is another opportunity for that. I have a recommended format for today. The Planning and Zoning Commission and staff have a lot of experience now with workshops on the EAR-based amendments, and I think this way will probably work out pretty well. And that involves doing the non-controversial elements first, and staff giving a real brief overview of each element or group of elements and highlight just some of the policies and objectives that are involved with each. Then with each element or group of elements, the Board of County Commissioners and the Planning and Zoning Commission can discuss the element, and you can ask for public input with each group and individual element.
Commissioners, everybody agreeable with that? Sounds good.
Just briefly, the planning process involves really 4 steps, and it's a continuous process. The first step is doing a plan, then the plan is implemented, then you evaluate the plan, and then revise the plan based on the evaluation. And we're at the last step now. The evaluation and appraisal report was adopted about 1.5 years ago, and since then we've been working to update and revise the comprehensive plan based on the EAR-based amendments. And that's really why we do the EAR-based amendments, to make changes to the plan based on the findings and the recommendations of the evaluation and appraisal report. There are 16 elements and sub-elements in the comprehensive plan. This provides a listing of them. We'll be going over them individually. As I said, the Planning and Zoning Commission had a number of workshops. In fact, What you're going to be doing today, the Planning and Zoning Commission did in 4 separate meetings. So we're going to try to do the Reader's Digest version today, but hopefully do everything, get everything looked at sufficiently. As I said, there's been a lot of input on the ear-based amendments. This slide, the next slide, shows all the committees that have looked at the ear-based amendments. We got a lot of good input from the county's committees, the Agriculture Advisory Committee, Utility Advisory Committee, the MPO Technical and Citizens Advisory Committee, the Economic Development Council, the Conservation Lands Advisory Committee. The committee spent a lot of time and effort on this. The Agricultural Advisory Committee spent, I think, probably 6 hours in 2 meetings going over these elements. So there's these ear-based amendments have been vetted pretty good at this point in time. When you look at the ear-based amendments, they all have generally 3 sections: an existing condition section, an analysis section, and a goals, objectives, and policies section. The existing condition section and analysis section, each element, have been completely rewritten. And so there was not, it wasn't feasible to show the changes in strike-through and underline form. The goals and objectives and policies, however, are shown in strike-through and underline form. So you can see the changes from the current comprehensive plan that we have that are proposed in the ear-based amendments. As we go forward, the most important part of the ear-based amendments, most important part of any plan, are really the objectives and the policies. The objectives are where you want to go, what you want to attain. The policies and the strategies are courses of action, how you get there. Now, if we can go into the elements, if we could take the first 3 as a group. The introductory element actually doesn't have any objectives and policies in it. It is really the data and information element. And you can see in there that the county's population projections are based on the Bureau of Economic and Research's mid-range projections. And the projections for the next 20 years are that the county is going to add a little over 50,000 people. The next 2 elements, the capital improvements element and the public school facility element, there were very minor changes. The capital improvements element has to be updated annually, so that's constantly changing, so there are very few changes there. And the public school facilities element was just adopted in 2007, so that wasn't really reviewed as part of the year, so there were very few changes. But if you want to stop at this point and just provide any comments, ask any questions, or get any public input, it would be.
Okay. Greg, is there anything that P&Z had on these elements?
Say again.
Did P&Z have any issues or anything on these 3 elements?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
They were minor. Minor.
Okay. Is any comment from the commissioners? How about anybody in the public? Does anyone wish to speak on these 3 elements at this time? Okay. Bob, do you need a formal motion or anything, or just this is a workshop, so we're just... Okay.
Yes.
So we'll proceed to the next one.
Actually, we're off to a pretty good start, 3 elements down, just like that. The next 2 elements are the economic development element, the transportation element. There weren't significant changes to either of those. The Economic Development Council has looked at the objectives and policies in detail over the last couple of years and made changes, so there aren't significant changes. There are a couple I want to highlight. There's a new objective to create 2 new industrial business parks in the county and a new policy to work with the municipalities in the county to jointly do economic development activities and particularly provide funding for economic development. With respect to the transportation element, I know you have all seen that in your capacity as Metropolitan Planning Organization members, so I know you're more familiar with that element. A few changes in that are that Actually, the transportation element retains the level of service standards policy, and primarily that's level of service D on most roadways. There was a change in the measure of the safety objective, and also revised the transportation and bicycle pedestrian level of service objective to really incorporate multimodal level of service standards as part of those two facilities. I do want to point out that right now the MPO is in the process of updating its long-range transportation plan, and when that's done, the transportation element will need to be amended to correspond to that. So there aren't major changes here in that, but there will be in the next couple of years. So with that, those are those two elements.
Okay. Comments? Greg, anything from the P&Z?
No, but any of our commissioners, I'd like for them to speak at any time they have an issue with any of these standards.
Okay. Bob, it seems that the sidewalks, either people love them or they hate them. With the revised objectives, we're going to continue forward with the sidewalk program?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anyone from the audience that wishes to speak on these two elements? Commissioner Wheeler.
Yeah, just a question on the economic development, and to have two new industrial business parks, what was the objective there? I mean, we've got some now that probably should be expanded rather than new ones. I'm just wondering, comment on that a little bit.
Actually, I think expanding one of the existing industrial parks would achieve the same objective. So
Okay.
I think it's consistent, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll move on, Bob.
We're doing real good time-wise, but remember, the controversial ones are at the end. The next two elements are the housing element and the intergovernmental coordination element. In the housing element, again, not a lot of major, significant, controversial changes. Some of the notable changes are revising one of the policies to expedite affordable housing project reviews, a new policy to support housing near transit stops, and a new policy to provide the Barrier Island municipalities, the Shores and Orchid, with the opportunity to meet their affordable housing needs by participating in the county's housing trust fund. In terms of the intergovernmental coordination element, there's a new policy to coordinate with the City of Vero Beach and Indian River Shores on a water consolidation study and evaluate electric service agreement, and also a new policy to continue work on and adopt an interlocal service boundary agreement. Just as a note, in some cases there's really overlap of policy between elements. You'll see the same policy regarding the water consolidation study in the potable water and sanitary sewer sub-elements too. But there are those two elements for your consideration.
Bob, on the intergovernmental coordination, do we need to be that specific, or should it just be more general that our policy should be to coordinate and cooperate with municipalities on whatever happens to come up, instead of specific to one project or another?
Actually, the way the policy is written, it is pretty general.
Is it? Okay.
It's that it doesn't presuppose one particular finding from it. It just says do the study and implement the results.
Okay. And then on the interlocal services agreement, I know we were kind of waiting for Fellsmere and DCA to work out. Now that that's been accomplished, are we going to move forward on that, or?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any comment, Commissioner Wheeler?
Yeah, the second policy in the housing element, new policy to support housing near transit stops. That makes sense, but once they build the houses there, they're going to want to move the transit stop.
That's the problem with bus transit instead of fixed rail transit. But you're correct. Hopefully, we look at it pretty closely, working with the Senior Resource Association as to where routes should go and where stops should be.
Any other comments from the commission? Anyone from the public wish to comment on these two elements? Okay, Bob, keep moving.
I think we've done 7 of 16 so far. The next two elements, sanitary sewer sub-element and the stormwater management sub-element. Just want to point out a few policies in each. With respect to the sanitary sewer sub-element, there's a new policy requiring that new subdivisions connect to a reuse line if there's a reuse line in close proximity. And there's also a new policy to request that the health department study the feasibility of the county instituting a septic tank maintenance program. With respect to the stormwater management sub-element, there are some policies relating to total maximum discharge limits, and these are some standards that both the State Department of Environmental Protection and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency are coming up with right now. And these policies generally say that the county will adopt these once they're finalized. And then there's a new policy to pursue funding for more canal filtration system projects. And at this point, I'd just like to make the point that not only have a number of my staff worked on these ear-based amendments, all the other departments in the county have worked hard too. Particularly, I want to point out with the sanitary sewer sub-element and potable water sub-element, solid waste sub-element, we coordinated extensively with the utilities department. And I think hopefully we have utility department staff here if any questions come up. And with stormwater management and several others, we coordinated closely with the Public Works Department. So these are the two elements.
Commissioner Davis?
Yes, Bob, on the sanitary sewer sub-element with the new subdivisions for connecting to reuse, that you said that if it's available, what would be the, or how would the rationale go that go ahead and to plumb them for reuse? With the thoughts of one day it becoming readily available?
Actually, they have to connect if the subdivision is over 25 lots and within a quarter mile of reuse line.
Pretty much all of them then. I mean, very few of them except for like the ones that have some of the exemptions for the 10 acres or smaller. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we have reuse lines within a quarter mile of all new subdivisions, but those
Is
would be
it either or, more than 25?
No, both.
That's, okay.
Both.
Okay.
And I guess to follow up on that, when a new subdivision comes in now, they have to put in water and wastewater lines as part of the infrastructure. Will this require them to put in the reuse lines as well, even if a reuse main isn't there yet?
No. They only have to put them in and connect if the criteria is met, over 25 lots and within a quarter mile.
Actually, excuse me, but I think gentlemen both
Donna,
have
make
an
sure your
extremely good point.
microphone is on. And
I think they have a very good point, and maybe that we should require a stub out, even though it's, the reuse water is not available at the time, providing a stub out for when it becomes available. I like that. I think it's a great idea.
And that's kind of where I was going with it, but I'd like to know a little bit more about the associated burdens or costs with that. And in fact, I think it would really be more beneficial for us to offer it as an incentive versus using groundwater if it's available. And not being a developer, and I don't see any out there right now that would say, oh, this is an awful idea. It costs more to bury reuse line at the same time you're burying water and sewer, but I really don't think it would.
Let me make sure we get someone from utilities here who can address that.
okay. Commissioner Swallow?
We also have to ask the question of how much reuse is going to be available. Right. I mean, we can have lines stubbed out everywhere, but it may never be available, so why pay for lines? I mean, as far as I understand it, the problem is not whether lines are there, it's whether the reuse water is there available at any time in the near future.
Well, I would think theoretically if a new subdivision comes in, they're going to create more wastewater, which then will generate more reuse water.
Yeah, but there's not enough
kind of self-fulfilling.
There's not enough reuse water today to supply everybody who wants it. So, and I don't know what that ratio is, but I think that is a preliminary question that needs to be looked at.
Can I address an issue with that? The city of Orlando has applied for a permit from St. John's to withdraw 50 million gallons a day from the St. Johns River to specifically enhance their gray water use for irrigation. So, you know, I mean, it's not necessarily a good thing to make these people plumb this if we don't know that we're going to have the capacity, and then say, well, we're going to take water from someplace else to be able to provide that service. And I think Mr. Solari's right on with that.
Is that 50 million now? Because I remember
Pardon
it
me?
started at 5 million.
50 million gallons a day is what they've applied for a permit for to,
So we are at Chinatown.
yeah.
So they're applying to stick another straw in the St. Johns River?
Right.
You know,
For reuse.
this is where,
To tie into their gray water system.
if they're serious about water farming, then they need to make those municipalities buy that water, and then we could have land here as reservoirs to generate that water to feed in, you know, upstream, and they pull it out downstream. But they need to start paying for that, you know, if we're going to get serious about this water
I
farming.
think the problem is that they're a taxing district, the St. John's Water Management District taxes, and so I'm not sure that by state law they can charge for water in that regard. I don't know, it's something to look at.
We'll have to
I'm
look
all
at
in
that.
favor of it.
Bob, on the sanitary sewer, two things. One, the requiring septic tank maintenance programs, everything I've ever heard about a septic tank is if it's working, don't mess with it. And when it fails, you know, but to go in there on a routine basis, have to pump it or do something, I've always heard if they're working, don't mess with them, don't change anything. So I don't know if we want to, that's almost like an unfunded mandate where we're coming down and forcing people to do something that may not be necessary. And then also I did have an email about existing homes having to hook up if a sewer line is run on the north barrier island. Can you address that? Because I know there's some concerns about the cost of that and whether it's necessary to require that.
Actually, that policy is in the conservation element, and we'll be coming to that real soon. With respect to the septic tank maintenance program, this policy is to do a feasibility study, so hopefully things like that you mentioned would come out at that time. Just to look at it, is it a good idea, not a good idea?
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Wheeler?
Yeah, in fact, that was the similar question what you had, and I think I'm a little concerned about even doing a study on it for a policy, because it can move forward, and before you know it, you've got another cost to residents. And I've been on septic tanks off and on over the years, and never had a problem. And usually, if there is a problem, it's pretty apparent, and somebody takes care of it. And if they don't, their neighbors complain, and it's taken care of. But I'm a little concerned about even going there, and I don't want to bury my head in the sand, but even going there and creating something. And I don't know how they create it, but, you know, an annual inspection or pump it out periodically or whatever when it's unnecessary. And government tends to do that a lot. And I'd have a concern about giving direction to look at that, because there's no problem that I'm aware of. You know, not to say there aren't some, but I'm not aware of any.
We have Mike here. Mike, the question we had was for new subdivisions, even if a reuse line isn't available, would it make sense to have them go ahead and lay in the piping and stuff, so if reuse does become available, they can hook up to it? And we had a question of how much of a cost that would be, or a burden to the development.
It really depends on what we're trying to get established is to go ahead and have them start out by using their stormwater system to generate the irrigation. And then as we get reuse water available, then we would supplement and surcharge those lakes with reuse. So if they could just go ahead and get their irrigation system to where it's obtained from the lake system and then surcharge as they need it from wells, that kind of stuff, then we could go ahead and surcharge it with reuse. And I think that's a lot better than if they just go ahead and use private wells. Right now we have about 1.5 million gallons per day of available reuse water that we're trying to find users for. And then as new subdivisions come online, they'll just self-generate more reuse water. So, you know, rather than have them withdraw irrigation from private wells, we think it's better just to have them withdraw from their stormwater retention systems, and then we'll supplement that with reuse water. And then as we run out of reuse water, we're also doing projects where we're interconnecting that with stormwater treatment areas and stuff like that, and then our brine systems, and then incorporating that into irrigation systems and reuse water.
And I guess then this is for Bob and Alan. When these plats come in, we've seen recently we have several plats where the county theoretically has an easement to put stormwater into the subdivision stormwater ponds. We never declared a dedicated an access easement to do that. So I guess going forward, we need to make sure we do that and include an access easement to run a reuse line to hook up to their stormwater system. So I guess just going forward, we need to make sure that wording is more clearly specified in the plat, where even if we have to design it or give reference to it, but we need to make sure we have a dedicated access to get to those stormwater ponds. So, Commissioner Wheeler?
No, I'll wait. I just want to go back to the septic tank maintenance when we're through with this again for a minute.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Davis?
And just thinking about along 510, that's probably going to be one of our next, 5 years out roads to widen. And I know there's several subdivisions along there that have agreed to take our wastewater. And in the process of them taking our wastewater, I'm assuming if history is any indication, we did not dictate what Commissioner O'Brien or Chairman O'Brien was talking about, where that easement will be. And I would imagine with what I'm seeing, if there are several of those subdivisions or PDs that are coming on, that are up there, will be losing their PD status here in short order. And so when we come back around the next time, we'll keep that in mind for access to, I guess you could say, deliver the stormwater.
Have them connect, please.
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments? Commissioner Wheeler, you want to go back to the sanitary sewer?
Yeah, just one final thought on that. I kind of look at this as the potential of opening up something, not unlike a lot of the other stuff government's doing now, red light cameras among some, but it's something that could open up a fee for annual inspections and turn into a revenue source rather than really providing a service. And that concerns me.
That's on the septic system?
That's on requesting the health department to study the feasibility of a septic tank.
Just for information on that, in Brevard County, they have what they call an aerobic system. And in the several areas of the Highland, the GDC development up in Brevard County, where they do not have water in place, and they're still relying on wells. The amount, the septic systems in the wells are so packed together in there with no municipal services that they require basically a septic system on steroids. It's called an aerobic system. And what that does is it allows septics more dense than what you typically would have. The problem with that is exactly what you're saying. It's like a $300 2-year policy that you have to hire a septic contractor to come out there every 6 months and inspect it, look at it, see to it that it's performing properly, and then interestingly enough, if it's not, then they fix it, and if you don't, as the homeowner, agree to fix it, then the septic contractor calls the health department, and the health department says you will fix it.
Well, and also I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, or with utilities, but pretty much, we're in pretty good shape in this county now, because even where they had septics, they've got portable water now, and I don't think we've got a mass problem with septics and wells. We did several years ago before we went with countywide utilities, but I think a lot of that's been corrected, and no new places have been developed because of our policy on water and sewer.
Commissioner Slurry?
Yeah, so instead of going down this way, which is moving towards regulation, do you think maybe we should go down towards education, where instead of the feasibility of septic tank maintenance program, we try to develop a best management practices for septic tanks, which are then available to the homeowner?
I think the more education we can do.
That's the direction I like to go with for water conservation, fertilizers, and everything else, and it's consistent with that. And it bypasses any sort of regulatory problem, but it helps develop the information, which is then hopefully readily available on websites and other areas where people can get easy answers. And if they're willing to do the right thing, which I think probably 99% of our citizens are, it's easy to do it.
I can't imagine it'd be very difficult either if utilities are building for water only. They know they got a septic tank. They could include that in their annual billing, just as part of the format.
Absolutely.
Well, and, I look at this as just like safety gear in a boat. Once you mandate it, the price triples, and then people don't buy it because it's so expensive. I think it's voluntary. People will get them cleaned out as they need it, and we'll go forward. So, I don't know, anybody else want to weigh in on this? Kind of seems the consensus is we don't really like this idea too much.
Peter?
So, Greg?
Bob, aren't our policies associated with septic based on the ratio and volume of septic in a general area and determined by soils, et cetera, the environmentals, and the concern that that material can oversaturate in some issues, and therefore we try to develop that policy?
Yes, that's correct. And also, we have similar policies in both the sanitary sewer sub-element and in the conservation element. The conservation element, it's more focused, looking at a septic tank maintenance program for properties that are proximate to the Indian River Lagoon. So that's much more narrowly focused.
I have a question, please. If we decide to go with an educational program instead of a mandatory every 2-year pump out program, I'm not sure if that is the place. I don't know if the comp plan is the place to put that, because I'm not sure it would be a measurable objective. May I have your thoughts?
Well, actually, this is an objective. It would be a policy. It would be an action that we do. And it really is an appropriate type of policy. It would indicate that the board's policy regarding septic tanks is to be more in the education realm as opposed to the regulatory realm.
And it would be measurable by?
Actually, it's objectives that need to be measurable. Policies
Okay, so you just make this a policy. Okay.
Well, I'd like to see it read that way rather than tank maintenance program. I think it sends two different messages.
So just change it to septic tank education program.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Any other discussion? Okay. Is anyone from the audience that wish to comment on these two elements? Yes, sir. Come on up. Your name and address for the record, please. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is George Butel. I live at 5000 16th Street, Indian River County. Regarding the stormwater management sub-element, is that I have my license in aquatic management, and I've been asked to go to several developments to look at problems with some of their stormwater ponds. And the biggest problem that I've seen is you can't get into them to be able to work on them. The houses are tightly packed together, and there's no room to do the maintenance, especially if you have to dig them out, or if a culvert goes bad, there's nowhere to get to it. So there has to be somewhere some sort of rule that is put in place to allow proper maintenance of these ponds. And I'm not talking about spraying for aquatics, where you can do that by hand or by boat. I mean the mechanical maintenance of the ponds.
Bob, in newer plats, is that
Yes.
accounted for? Okay.
Yes, the land development regulations require easements, and it has been put in newer plats probably in the last 10 years or so.
Okay. So I guess, Mr. Patel, going forward, that will be taken into account with some of these older subdivisions. We may not be able to go back and find a spot for what you're discussing.
I understand that, but even to get to the ponds between the houses, and I understand that's taken care of with easements, I'm talking about getting around the pond. So there has to be an easement around the entire pond also.
Yes.
Is there? Okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would wish to address these two elements?
I have one last question. Did we agree to require stub outs for the reuse on all new subdivisions or not?
I don't think so. I think from what Mike said, it's easier if we just make sure we have an access easement So if we do get reuse there, we run the reuse to their stormwater system, and then they run their irrigation out of those. So we wouldn't need to require the stub out at time of land clearing.
As opposed, Mr. Chairman, as opposed to making it a requirement, was there any discussion on incentivization to have the contractors go forward with their subdivisions?
Is that with reuse when
Yes.
it's available? I think what we're trying to do is when it's within a quarter of a mile, we're trying to make that a requirement, just as with water and sewer, that they go ahead and extend the reuse to their subdivision, use that to supplement their lakes for reuse.
And if we're gearing the septic tank policy towards education, and we might want to look at this whole sub-element as an awareness education and incentivization, we don't know if we're going to have that reuse water available. We don't know how much demand is going to be placed upon reuse water. And we did have a recent discussion on reuse water as far as the golf courses, and the rate structure has changed. I realize it's not a tremendous cost factor in placing that piping in, but we might want to do it in the form of encouragement.
Encouragement, okay.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, Bob, we'll move on. Thank you, Mike.
Moving forward, the next two elements are the solid waste sub-element, the recreation and open space element. With respect to the solid waste sub-element, they just want to call your attention to one of the objectives that's being revised to increase the amount of recycling. Again, that's an objective. That's what the county would like to achieve. With respect to the recreation open space element, several new policies there. One, to evaluate the recreation user fee structure. Another, to look at funding options for recreation, parks and recreation, and particularly look at privatization as one of the alternatives. Another new policy is to update both the North and South County regional park plans, and there is a revised objective to have a cultural plan for the county. We worked with the Cultural Council on that. So those are the issues with those two elements.
Bob, my question there on the recreation, the two middle policies there, do those really need to be in our comp plan, or those just be more appropriate actions or policies that the board takes? To me, that's getting such a specific thing, whether that's really a comp plan objective or policy. And then the bottom one, an objective to have a cultural plan for the county. Well, I fully support the concept. Is that a want or a need? Because I can see this, if we start going down that path and we don't have funding for it, with the budget the way it is, we need to start deciding, are we providing basic needs to the community, and is this a need or is this a want that we may not be able to fund?
Addressing your last question first, I just want to point out that the Cultural Council originally wanted the county to do a cultural element in the conference plan, and we actually talked them out of that and indicated that we can do an objective with some policies, and hopefully that will suffice. So, but in answer to your question, yeah, it's probably more of a want than a need. But I do want to tell you that we worked with the Cultural Council on this. With respect to the other recreation policies, those really are appropriate to have in the comp plan. The comp plan really should identify what actions, what avenues that the county is going to pursue going down the road. And it's good to have in there if we're going to update plans, revise plans, or do studies, to have them in there.
Okay. Commissioner Wheeler and then Commissioner Starr.
Yeah, my question would be follow up on Peter. When you get into the budgetary constraints, and this is in the comp plan, and Tallahassee's accepted it, at what level do we decide we can afford this or not afford this, and at what point does this take precedent over maybe some other serious situation we may have and no funding? In other words, are we going to have to do certain things for recreation or for a cultural plan or et cetera because it's in our comp plan when there are other things that, you know, I at least think are more important, like public safety or transportation, et cetera. If you've got to decide where the dollars go, would this set a precedent where, okay, you've got to put so many dollars here, but you've still got to put so many here?
Actually, in this case, both involve doing studies. And actually, the first two under the recreational open space are doing studies to look at the revenue sources and how better to get the money needed to provide the services that the people in the county want. So there's no mandate to spend money with any of those policies.
Thank you.
Commissioner Flory?
And on the cultural plan, is that something that the county would have to do, or is that something that the cultural council wanted in there because they wanted to do it, and this is the type of thing that if it's in the comprehensive land use plan, it makes their work easier going for grants and things like that?
The latter.
Okay, so again, I'm with you, Commissioner Wheeler, not having to spend county money on it, but again, there are a lot of those grants out there that need the county checkoff. On, you know, it's a little box that they check off, and this is, I think, one of those boxes where it doesn't mean too much in terms of resources for the county, but means everything for an organization like the Cultural Council.
I think when it came up with us, I was under the impression it was like an evaluation as much as anything, which does exactly what you're talking about, Bob. So they could point it out for state grants. And that's why it was innocuous to us.
Okay. Joe?
Yeah, Joe Baird, County Administrator. I think the less language you have regarding that, the better off you are, because what happens is, if you'll recall, they get a higher chance of being funded. They get put in quasi-nonprofit if you mention them in the comp plan. If you don't mention them, then we don't put them in that.
Isn't the Cultural Council always already quasi-nonprofit?
That's what we ended up doing because it was mentioned in the comp plan. Also, studies cost money. So when you put in the fact that you're going to do a study, it costs money.
Yeah, but as mentioned, this is one that the Cultural Council would do if it was done, and not necessarily the county.
Well, what it does, because you mention them, it makes us have funding available for them. It's a high priority on it.
But Joe,
that's how it was addressed. In fact, the commission voted because it was put in the comp plan to put it as quasi-judicial.
Quasi-nonprofit.
Yeah. Which gives it a higher standing. I just wanted to point that out. If you recall, the board, and I think Commissioner Wheeler will recall that because it was mentioned in the comp plan, it ended up being moved into quasi-judicial, which gives a higher priority as far as funding.
Yeah, and the thing that concerns me about a lot of this is, maybe carrying it too far, but value-added tax, it's on everybody's lips today. Nobody accepts responsibility for it. Nobody's going to do it. Everybody's opposed to it. But when they start talking about it, somewhere down the road it starts happening. And that seems to be, the track record of government. An idea is an idea, and before you know it, turns into a reality, and it costs you money, and there's more bureaucracy and more laws and more rules, and so I may be reaching too far, but it's a concern that I have.
So what do we do? I agree with you, and
I think the other thing is, I think on any of these plans we have, the more simple, concise, and brief they are, the better.
You got one thing we all reminded ourselves, and it is a looming factor out there, which a lot of you all know about, is still hometown democracy. And we don't know what's going to happen once this thing is in place, if in fact it gets in place with your comp plan. So it's our advice to ourselves and to you all would be to keep things as simple as you can. If you don't need it in the comp plan, I wouldn't put it there. I'd leave it under some other function of the government if you can do that.
I would agree with that.
Peter.
Yeah, go ahead,
We
Greg.
have a member of the audience
Yes.
who likes to speak to that.
Good morning. Welcome. Your name and address for the record, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Barbara Hoffman, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Cultural Council of Indian River County. I'd like to address the revised objective to have the cultural plan for the county. The Cultural Council is very interested in doing this plan, We have actually started raising funds to build the plan. We have laid out our methodology and our planning process and schemes and so forth based upon different levels of funding, and we are very pleased to assume this responsibility.
Okay, thank you.
But how does that keep us from being locked into that? I mean, I understand exactly what Commissioner Wheeler's saying, and I understand the grant process. When we had this happen with, what was it, Marine Resources Council needed to add some language into our comprehensive plan about collaborating with nonprofits for environmental conservation and the way the grant, I mean, I understand how you need this somewhere in here, but I kind of agree with Commissioner Wheeler on this, that it's one of those slippery slopes that once you get too far to turn around, and that does concern me. But I don't know of any. I mean, I'm after ideas here. Your turn.
Well, in our planning process, we and funding for the plan, we have not included the county as a resource for that particular project.
Let me ask why you think it's important to have it in the comprehensive land use plan.
Well, I think it's important because the amount of monies that are given to the county in regards to with all the cultural organizations in our county is extremely important and very, very high. I believe it's well over $300 million are spent in Indian River County by the cultural agencies in this county. And I feel that with the development of a cultural plan where we can actually get the footprint of the entire county is very important. Right now, the Cultural Council spends most of its time and efforts in Vero Beach and not all of Indian River County. We need to expand and get up into Fellsmere. We need to get to Gifford. We need to be in Indian River Shores. We need, particularly in Sebastian. And so being able to build a cultural plan for our entire county and look at all of the cultural opportunities and where they're, and where there could be duplication, I think that it could make a much, much better system, and I think that it could blend very easily and quickly into the cultural plan, the entire cultural plan for Indian River County, and support all of what we're trying to do.
Just, Bob, going through some of the actual policies, there's a lot in here that will require the county to spend tax dollars to do some of these things. Again, and I'm fully supportive of the Cultural Council. I probably gave out over 200 of your calendars this year, so I really appreciate everything you do. My concern is looking out for all the taxpayers. Really, is this a basic need that the county has to fund, or is it better? I mean, I'm all for supporting things and having a plan, and so you can put it on a grant application to help draw in money. But when we have to start hosting workshops for artists and seminars, those things cost money. And there's other things in here, a funding request to the county annually, things like that. I'm just concerned that in times of very little tax dollars and having to focus on basic needs, whether we really need all these policies in here. And again, I'm fully supportive of what you all do. You do a great job, but I'm just concerned that we're having to fund a lot of it.
Well, Commissioner, the Cultural Council is in a transitional stage at this time anyway, and are looking at finding ways to fund the Cultural Council outside of government. And we have put together a business plan. It's in the final adoption procedures by the council to look other places, to go other places in the development in order to gain monies to be able to carry out all of these responsibilities. So we're making quite a change and shift in direction in where we find our support.
Okay, great. Bob, maybe what we need to do on this one is we'll keep moving here, but it sounds like when this comes back to us, maybe we need to make sure all the commissioners have the specific policies related to this, and we might need to go through them policy by policy when we take formal
We
action
would
on
be
it.
happy to do that, and we would be happy to bring, to share with you our plan and how we're planning to make this transition, and also bring to you our budgets and projections.
Okay, that'd be wonderful, thank you.
Thank you very
Commissioner
much.
Davis?
And just real quick, is there a state requirement that we have some kind of, if I'm not mistaken, there is some kind of requirement from the state as far as cultural activities, is that correct? In some line like this? Or are we just doing this because?
There's nothing that requires it in the comprehensive plan.
Okay, all right.
Let me just point out that this objective and these policies, this is objective 9 in the recreational open space element, and it's on page 53. It starts on page 53.
Okay, Ms. Hoffman, thank you very much for your input. We
Thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much, Commissioner.
And good luck with your plan and everything you guys do. You guys do a great job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, is there any other comments then on these two elements? Anyone else from the audience wish to speak? Okay, seeing none, Bob, we'll keep moving.
Going forward, the next two elements are the natural groundwater aquifer recharge sub-element and the coastal management element. The natural groundwater aquifer recharge sub-element, there's a new policy in there to adopt a water conservation ordinance. Under the coastal management element, there are several new policies. One is to evaluate the location of what's called the DSSL, that's a dune stabilization setback line. It's a line of prohibition along the ocean. To evaluate that and looking at the possibility of moving that westward, which is landward. There's a new policy that there was brief mention of before to require oceanfront development to hook up to sewer if the sewer is available. And then a new policy to seek funding from FIND to construct a boat ramp at Gifford Dock Road.
Excellent. Yeah.
Any Commissioner Solari?
Yeah, on the natural groundwater, the new policy to adopt a water conservation ordinance, is this a general policy, or is this going to be one that affects residents?
This would be one that affects residents. It would be consistent with the St. John's.
Okay, I'd like to get this out of our comprehensive land use plan. I'm a proponent of education, not regulation, and I can give you the whole speech now if you want to, or save it for another day. But I think these things are incredibly egregious. And in fact, I have a meeting with some St. John's people on Wednesday to try to figure out what our county can do do instead of their ordinances and move towards education. And I've read a lot of the St. John stuff, and I've never seen anything which suggests that regulation is even better than education, that it couldn't be accomplished through education. So that's all I'll say now. Sorry.
I move that we save it for another day.
Yeah. I would second that if we could take a vote at a workshop.
Yeah, I think in the past, this board has kind of adopted a position that we don't want to be in the water enforcement business, and that's St. John's job, and we've been supportive of educational efforts. I know our stormwater department sends out a monthly newsletter and tries to educate people, but I would kind of go along with Commissioner Solari. I don't think we want to get in the water enforcement business.
I would like to point out one other thing. I mean, in the St. John's River Water Management 210 Water Assessment Plan, we're not a water caution area, which suggests that we've done a much better job to begin with in shepherding our water resources. But I think that this gives us an opportunity to actually take a real leadership role in water conservation, but not doing it in a way which, in my mind, does a lot of bad things along the way. So I think that we can actually challenge the St. John's to let us work towards a water conservation methodology which is better than anything in the state, and that will be one which our citizens embrace rather than have to fight against or watch against, or watch the water police coming down their block.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Wheeler?
Yeah, I would agree with Commissioner Solari. The only thing that I would caution is we went through this a few meetings ago, and it's kind of like St. John says, basically we're recommending this, but if you don't do it, we're going to hit you with a big stick.
Yeah. Actually, but
and so I agree with you. I think that at some point in time you have to say, you know.
And that's why I'd like to take a proactive stance with this and go back to St. John's and hopefully get them to actually work on a different path.
And I applaud your efforts in this, Commissioner Solari. You know, to pick that up and to run with it. We all agree with it, and for you to take this as one of your points of interest, I certainly appreciate it. Because, of course, all 5 commissioners can't do this at the same time, and I know that you'll do a good job, and we're supportive of you.
And there's no need. I mean, that is one thing good about this commission. We all seem to have interests which we focus on, and it allows us to, I think, do more with fewer resources.
And then, Bob, if you can go to the policy to require the oceanfront development to hook up, that was the email I had received that there would seem to be considerable cost to the homeowners to have to adhere to this. Can you go into a little more detail on that, please?
Yeah, the genesis for this policy really is the effect of septic tanks on the water bodies, particularly the effect on the ocean from septic tanks that are they're definitely susceptible to erosion on significant storms like hurricanes, and the health department's been working incrementally trying to reduce, move back, or eliminate septic tanks when some of the houses are rebuilt. And actually, in Summer Place, their utilities is doing installing some sanitary sewer lines there, and this policy is just a little more encompassing than that. The policy does specifically say this would only kick in for new development and only if the sewer is available.
How does that differ from everywhere else then? If the sewer is available for new development, they don't have to tap into it?
Yes. It is. Our connection matrix requires that if it's within for developments over a certain size.
Okay.
Roland, welcome.
I think Roland DeBlois, Chief of Environmental Planning. As Bob mentioned, back when we had the 2004 hurricanes, we had some drain field and septic systems that were actually eroded and onto the physical beach, and that was one of the big concerns. As Bob said, it is tempered by new development and where available. I think the intent is it's not just by the threshold of a certain number of units, but also could apply to individual single-family homes. I think that's where some of the concern had come up. But it still would be, if available, and only for new developments.
I guess part of the concern is if we run a sewer line all the way up to Sebastian Inlet, and if there is a hurricane, how is that sewer system going to function? You know, if you require somebody to get on the sewer system because you're worried about hurricane erosion and such, and then with a hurricane we're going to be out of power, so how are we going to run the lift stations to keep that sewer system working?
Generators.
Well, we're in a lot better shape than we were in the hurricanes back in 2004 and 2005. We have a lot more generators online. They're all if they don't have a standby generator, a fixed generator, they at least have a receptacle to where we can go up there and recycle them.
Portable ones.
We've eliminated about over 250 lift stations in the Rockridge area, so that kind of eliminated 250 right off the bat that we don't have to recycle. Well, it wasn't really that many. We had about 7 that had centralized electrical stations. So we were actually recycling out of those 250, probably 60 stations or so that we were having to recycle. So that eliminated those 60 stations we don't have to recycle. So with the addition of several more generators, elimination of a lot of stations we don't have to recycle through, additions of a lot of standby generators that have automatic throwover switches where if the power goes off, it automatically turns on the generator, switches electric over. We're in a lot better shape than we were, 5 years ago.
And then, Bob, will this require existing homes to hook up if we run sewer, or can they still stay on their septic?
Well, if when we're doing assessment projects, we don't require them to connect. They would have to participate in the assessment costs. But as far as having to connect, if they have a good functioning septic system, will allow them to go ahead and stay on that until a septic system fails or, they choose to connect on their own.
In an assessment project, though, isn't it a vote? Isn't it like 75%?
Yeah, typically
You've got to have a
75%.
high percentage of the homeowners that request it first.
Right.
Not just the
Of course,
county
the
decide to
BCC
run it
has
up
to
there, which
approve
is kind of
those.
what it sounds like here.
Right.
Commissioner Davis?
Is there any desire from the inlet on the Indian River County side to hook up to sewer at all?
They, at one time, were going to do that, and then they abandoned it, and they went with a real elaborate septic system over there at the inlet part. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
And they were going to extend the force main all the way from where we had it right there, the North Jungle Trail terminus, and all the way to Inlet Park, but then they abandoned it.
And where do they get their water from their own system too then? Or is there water?
I believe they do, because I don't think there's any water around there. We do have water fairly close to there, but we don't have it extended all the way to the park.
And I'm assuming that our the park that we have, the very next park south, we have a septic system in that then?
Yes. Well, as far as south, or as far north as we go, is just that that one. Is it Seaview subdivision? Yeah, that's as far north.
Far north as
right
water and sewer?
Well, water would go a lot farther.
Okay.
We go up to right up there to I think McCarty State Park.
McCarty Museum.
Yeah, McCarty Museum.
Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak on these elements?
Yeah, it's over 50% on assessments is all we're required to do for assessments.
So it's 50, not 75.
Right.
Okay.
I'll have to, Bob Bruce, 12396 North A1A. Have to apologize. I'm getting over a sinus infection that went to my chest. But the Inlet Park could very easily get a stimulus money or whatever to extend this line up there. And it's going to be very difficult to plumb Ampersand Beach subdivision. So you just need to take that into account. This is a huge unfunded mandate, and there's been no cost-benefit analysis at all.
How would this affect a developed subdivision that's already in place then, if we're only requiring this on new development?
Sorry, I didn't really understand.
Mr. Bruce is talking about Ampersand. It's already developed.
Right.
And so what I heard you say is this policy is only for new development.
Right. So for existing subdivisions, that would fall into the assessment. So this wouldn't really affect any existing subdivisions.
That's what I thought, but with Mr. Bruce's concerns, though, are we safe in saying this does not affect it? His concerns are not affected by this?
No, I think if there was a vacant lot in Ampersand Beach,
okay,
it would affect that lot if the line was available. If there's a pre-existing house that's on septic, it would not affect it. It could potentially affect it, and this is part of the question.
All right, so this is concerning me then. So if there's a lot in Ampersand subdivision, and we run sewer past it, then they would be required, or the community, somebody would be required to get it to that lot no matter where that lot is in that subdivision.
Yeah, if we run sewer past Ampersand's, a new sewer system past that, and there's a new lot there, they're within 200 feet, or they have
it's not new lot. Right. It's an existing lot.
Existing lot. If they have a failed failed septic system, they would be required to connect that.
So how would we? That's private roads.
Yeah, because then we would have an easement. If we had our sewer system in there, we would obtain an easement on a private road.
Actually, Ampersand lots access directly from A1A.
Right.
There aren't any roads.
Well, I thought they're ocean to...
They run. I understand that, but... So the burden of that one system, that one person that may have a lot along, I don't know, pick the road that runs east of A1A in the Ampersand division, we would...
There is the lots run from A1A to the ocean.
Right, and the roads run east from A1A.
No.
Just driveways.
Driveways, right.
That's what I mean.
When you said road, we're talking
Barefoot
about-
Lane or whatever it is, that runs east of my,
I think the easiest way to clarify it is that if it's a vacant lot and they build a house, they have to hook up. If they have an existing septic tank and it fails, and we have a line in front of it, they would have to hook up if they're, just like everyone else, if their septic tank fails. In the event an existing structure, their septic tank, they will be required to hook up to our sewer system.
Makes sense.
I think that's simple.
And what do you mean by fail? Like if they have it come and pumped out for maintenance, is that considered failed or
No,
not?
no, that's just routine maintenance.
Okay, what if they-
Drain fill.
if they call to get a drain field repair permit.
Drain field.
Okay, but that might just be because a tree roots grew in it.
Exactly.
So if that happens, if a tree grows into the roots and they have to have their drain field redone, they don't have that option, they have to hook up to sewer.
If it's available, right. If it's available within 200 feet.
Well, I guess then, to me, we're encouraging people to go out and cut down all the trees on their property, so that never happens. I don't think that's good policy. I could see if there's a hurricane and then the whole house is demolished, then we require a hookup, but just because someone's redoing their drain field, it can still function just as good. And just because they were a good citizen and had some sea grapes or some other type of coastal tree, and they're encouraging that growth, and then they have to redo their drain field because the roots got in it, I don't see I want to force them to hook up at that point.
I think that 200 feet is a state law. It's a state requirement. So it's not us. It's once the sewer line is in front of that property, that's a state law that they have to hook up in the event.
How far does that sewer line run now?
Where's Emerson in relation to Seaview? Is that
South.
Yeah,
Wait.
we don't have it going past Emerson now.
Or no.
Ambersand's north.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I was fixing to say. Y'all, Ambersand is up there, ocean to river. Summer Place is where we're talking about, right?
Yeah, we're talking about Emerson.
Sorry about that.
Welcome to Donna Cox.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. now I understand why you were saying the roads didn't run off to the east. I was, okay.
Did you just say never mind?
Yeah, I did. Thank you.
Hey, Peter,
Greg, yes.
I think that's a pretty tough policy. It seems as though his intent is that anything new, you've got to hook up. But it seems,
I'm okay with that. If it's your unbuilt lot, when they come in for their building permit, yeah, they got to hook up. I'm good with that.
well, I can see the other side too, because it seems to me that the science should drive whether that hookup should occur when you've got 9 people on septic and you've got to hook up to the county because it's new, as opposed to determining whether that available area geophysically can accept another septic tank. If it can accept another septic tank, the science says that's okay, then why cause them, other than it's new, so it's got to do it? I just think that there should be more allowance there for whether it's absolutely necessary or not. It's an enormous cost.
I think,
Commissioner Wheeler?
yeah, I don't see anything that would drive putting the sewer line further north unless Sebastian Inlet decided to spend a few $1 million to run it up to them because they get state money. But that's pretty much developed up there. The other thing is almost all of those are really large lots.
All right.
They may be narrow, but they're very lengthy, and I don't know much about drain fields, but you've got a lot of sand there. That, you ought to have a fairly good filtering system, I would think, also. So, I think we're kind of making a mountain out of a molehill, and if it ever does go there, maybe leave this for a later date in the comp plan, because first, it doesn't exist. And it's creating a lot of stress on people up there looking at the expense of this at this point.
Mr. Chairman.
Let me, Commissioner Fleischer.
No, that was my point, too, that it doesn't exist. We're discussing something that is way far off into the future. But nonetheless, I think I want to draw the correlation of best management practices for property management by homeowners. We have I just heard about wanting to have to cut trees down and clear cut property to make sure that the septic tank is running well in avoidance to hooking up to the sewer line. Well, we have the same concept with wells, do we not? If your well fails and county water is available, you must hook up.
That's correct.
I can't repoint and re-drill a well.
Well, yeah, you can re-drill it for irrigation, but you can't connect your house back up to it if it fails. It's a public health requirement.
So we can't move forward with any well maintenance if the well fails. You must
move
hook up.
forward with maintenance, but if it fails, you have to connect to county water when it's available.
Is that the state law he was referring to? That's what my question would be. It's in this failure or maintenance?
Yes, that's
If
the
you
state
ran the
law.
water. So
Right.
it really is, Gary's right. I mean, it's a moot point. If the county decides to run it up there and someone's septic tank fails or whatever, you have to do this anyway. So I mean, there's no sense writing it down into the policy unless there's. I'd just say take it out.
Yeah, we're mandated to do that.
Because it looks like it's mandated anyway if you put it up there.
Right. Okay. Bob, did you want to follow up?
Save some research money.
You know, I guess the reason that I brought this up is because there's a potential for Sebastian Inlet State Park to get a stimulus money, whatever, to run that sewer line up there. And at that point, we're stuck.
Bob, and that's our point is that if they do that, you have to follow state law anyway, and that means that what they're talking about, you're going to have to follow.
We have no choice in the matter.
Exactly.
We can't vote it down.
And
if they get that stimulus money, it's done deal.
But it's not. That's not this commission's problem. So I mean, I think they're addressing by just taking it out, at least whether the county does it or not. But
The other thing, logically, and I know that doesn't play in much in government, but logically, I would think because of the development north of the inlet, they've got to have sewer for some of the big condos and stuff that are north. And I would think that if they were going to do something, Sebastian Inlet State Park would probably look at running something across the inlet from the north because.
Actually, the sewer line in Brevard, I don't think it comes, but maybe like to Aqua Arena somewhere in there. I think it stops about right.
Although if they do that, I can't imagine it not coming. If the Sebastian Inlet on the south side can do something within River County, I can assure eventually Long Point's going to be on a septic system, or excuse me, the sewer system than a septic system.
And we could encourage them to go with Brevard instead of us.
Yeah.
Okay, Bob, I think we'll take that policy out, but we're stuck with the state law. Bob Keating, one last thing on the fine grant. Is there a time requirement on that? Because I know we're looking to apply for the Oslo boat ramp. We're also applying for the Indian River Land Trust Greenway project. And I think the Sebastian folks were applying for something too. So I just want to make sure that those are already in the works and this doesn't supersede them.
But both of those fine grant applications have been submitted, and the cutoff for this cycle has already occurred. So this would be a subsequent cycle.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any further comments on these two elements? Bob?
I just wanted to say thank you very much.
Thank you for coming out and giving us your comments. Okay, Bob, we'll move on.
All right, only a few more elements, but we are getting into the more controversial types of issues. On the conservation element, there's a new policy to get a updated geohydraulic study by 2015. There's also a new policy that the county will coordinate with other agencies to prepare and adopt a countywide scrub jay habitat conservation plan, and a revised objective to preserve a minimum of 5,000 acres of upland communities by 2020.
Is that an additional 5,000 acres?
Yes.
I know in the Conservation Land Advisory Committee, when they looked at that, it was kind of, their thought was to set the bar pretty high, realizing it may not be necessarily a realistic goal, but at least setting the bar high for something to shoot for. Is that?
Yeah, we had recommended a much more conservative number, several hundred acres, I think, and this is not necessarily preserving it just through acquisition. It's preserving it through upland set-aside conservation easements and preserving it through other ways, too.
Okay. Commissioner Davis?
Why would this be any different than our wants versus our needs of, like, the Cultural Council?
I think it's more of a need to achieve certain other objectives: wildlife protection.
Those needs are coming from where?
Coming from just because of the threat of development and the impacts of development. I think what we're talking about, I think it's more of a need to protect wildlife, to protect endangered ecosystems. I think that's more of a need than a want.
How would this not become something as burdensome, or if you will, as the manatee protection program has on docks, in our waterways? I mean, and is that really how something like this started? I think that really started more as a state mandate, and that's what I'm trying to find out. Is this something the state's telling us to do, or is this something that we're placing on ourselves?
The state has a lot of requirements in Florida Administrative Code, Code 9J5, about what needs to be in a comp plan. We have to have objectives on this and policies on this, and natural resource protection is one of the things we have to have policies on and objectives on. They don't specifically say that there has to be a policy for protecting upland conservation areas. But let me answer your specific question that you had before. This is a lot different from the Manatee Protection Plan. The Manatee Protection Plan requirements are regulatory. This is an objective, a target, that it would be nice to achieve this. There's no requirement here, and the policies under the objective provide ways to go about to try to achieve this. But
this concerned me just very similar to what Commissioner Wheeler mentioned about the Cultural Council. I mean, and the dollars and where it starts and how it grows into, and then next thing you know, we're buying land for scrub jays because it's in our plan when we're out of dollars from the environmental land bond. That's just my thoughts.
And I, Gary Wesley, we're agreeing a lot. But, it's the same thing. You say it's a plan and it's kind of a want to, but at some point in time, somebody later down the road says, well, geez, if we've got it in there, why don't we make it law and make it mandatory? It's just, it's kind of the old saying, the camel's nose under the tent sometimes.
In your comments about more to the scrub jay conservation plan?
Yes, both the last two bullets there, and as well as to preserve a minimum of. I mean, how are we going to do that? And that, don't get me wrong, it's a noble idea, but right now, if I have dollars, I would like to be able to put those dollars where we get the most bang for our buck. And there's a whole bunch of importance, a whole bunch of wants, but I'm not sure that this one or the one with the Cultural Council rises to the top just yet.
James?
Bob, what happens if the Department of Interior U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service makes this mandatory to have a HCP for the scrub jay countywide?
I don't think they would make it mandatory per se, but what's going to happen is we're finding scrub jays in additional areas now. We've found scrub jays in Vero Lake Estates. There are some other places. One of the advantages of having one of the advantages of having a scrub jay HCP is we can deal with it as a whole. Probably 10 or 15 years ago, we did the scrub jay HCP for the Sebastian Highlands and made several hundred lots up there buildable that were unbuildable.
Right.
And that's what can be done with a countywide HCP. We can look at where the scrub jays are and where U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would actually impede development and deal with it kind of like on a holistic basis.
Again, yeah, just to add on to that, it's really a proactive approach, so you don't get caught short. You have a development that really is beneficial to the community, but it's cut short because they have to do an individual HCP. If you do a regional one up front, it's all planned out. You know what you're dealing with up front. It actually is time effective once it's in place.
Okay, thank you. Bob, if we don't make the 5,000 acres, I mean, that's just an objective. There's no punishment or anything we have to. I mean, I understand the concept of setting the bar high, just as long as it doesn't back us into a specific corner.
Yeah, there are no sanctions if we don't meet it. As I said, we initially came in with the bar set real low. I think we had 100 acres.
It was at 1,000 when it hit us.
I think it was originally 500. and it's evolved to a higher amount from feedback we got is just to shoot for a higher bar, even though, as we indicated, it's not a penalty if we don't meet it.
It's only 100 on the scrub chain.
So it was 1,000 when it came to P&Z, and you all bumped it up?
No, we didn't bump it up.
I think the objective was bumped up. I think what's being referred to now is one of the policy references.
Right. It's a reference in the, I
It
just
went
was
from
reading the
100 to
language.
1,000.
Okay.
I have a question.
Commissioner Wheeler?
Yeah, I'm just curious. You mentioned that scrub jays have moved into Vero Lakes estates, and I'm just curious because I don't
Can we
know.
count
but
that?
Is it the same habitat that they have in other areas, or has there been some change to the habitat and the birds are progressing into a gradual evolution of a different habitat?
Well,
They chose the upscale community.
they're expanding into more of a scrubby flatwood versus a pure oak scrub, and a lot of it's just out of essentially because there's less oak scrub. So there are some that are getting.
And I think there's places where you lose habitat, you may make something extinct, but from what I've read, I know in New York City, and Bob may know, but they've imported falcons to kill pigeons, and they've adapted very well to the city life, and they eat quite well off the pigeons.
Crashing coyotes in Central Park, too.
Yeah.
Okay, is there anyone in the audience that wishes to comment on this? Yes, sir, come on up.
Haven't we already started doing this with our $50 million bond issue that we passed, and we've bought some development rights, and what's that? I mean, we've already done a lot of this, and we've spent a lot of money doing it.
Yes, sir, you're correct. I think this is just going forward over the next 10 years as an objective to continue that program.
It is actually a 20-year plan to 2030.
Well, we only have 10
it's
years
got
left.
2020.
It uses 2008 as a baseline, right?
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think we'll be paying for the property that we bought or the developments that we purchased for the next 10 years. I'm sure of that. So, I mean, we've already accomplished a lot of this.
Yes, sir, thank you.
I mean, this is really all, Bob Bruce again, this is really all contingent on Florida Forever being funded. And right now, the legislature is not funding it, so it's an objective. It'll never happen until Florida Forever gets funded. And we as a county are going to have to float another bond in order to fund this as well. And I don't see that happening.
That's why, and then, or they'll use this as the leverage for the bond and all. I'm at this point, I'm not in favor of those last two bullets.
Commissioner Sorry?
Is buying the land the only way to get this acreage? I mean, if we had a new town, and the new town was designed in such a way that you stacked the density in one corner and left the rest of it preserved forever, wouldn't that accomplish the objective?
Yes.
So, I mean, again, I don't see this as particularly a bond issue or a government dollar issue. This could be the way we write our land development regulations issue, and we can start, actually it won't happen in our lifetime when we go beyond the urban service area, but if we get a new town or something else like that, we can use this to help with the design elements to build a better type of community.
And Mr. Chairman, and I see that as a level of redundancy. I mean, you have, and we've seen that in the beach project and all that. We don't, our policy really is going to be insignificant compared to the Fish and Wildlife Service and all these other state agencies and federal agencies. They are going to tell us where we're going to put the new town, Mr. Commissioner Solari. It's not going to be us. I mean, if that habitat's there, they're going to say, you will stay off of this, and anything we have is going to be irrelevant, in my opinion. And to have it in here twice is just...
Okay.
I'm happy to go down that road if you feel that way.
I do.
Commissioner Wheeler, anything, or Commissioner question?
Well, I'm a little uncomfortable with it, too. I just want to ask Roland, we're looking at 5,000 acres. What have we done in the past 12 years, and at what cost to the taxpayer?
Scrub jay habitat.
Well, since we started the bond program, we've acquired or participated in acquisition and protection of over 12,000 acres. One of the things, again, I think an important part of this is the aspect of the conservation easements and private development aspects of it. And we think that's actually a pretty good factor. For example, the Corrigan mitigation bank, even though that's out there for wetlands, there's a lot of upland aspects to it too. So it's not that unreasonable over the next 10 years that we would approach that goal without it being a real, necessarily contingent upon fee simple acquisition.
Wesley, I would suggest that the possibility you go back, maybe not pull this completely out just because it's like the cultural council. It's something that's I'll say a feel-good want for the county, and it's not, if you cut back to the 1,000 acres or go back to a lower number, there's still no measure of success or failure, but you have something in your plan that at least acknowledges the fact that you're looking at uplands, and I think that probably would be smart to continue to in some form or fashion.
That's excellent. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I think whenever you start taking into account exactly what 5,000 acres of upland communities means in Indian River County, considering that everything we've done already is 12,000 acres, and that's everything, not just scrub jay habitat.
That's why I said if you cut back.
I mean, I can really.
The 5,000 isn't just scrub jay habitat. I just want to make that clear.
Upland communities, so it's certainly geared in that direction, I would say.
There was 1,600 out on Pageant and 600, I think, at Sexton, or 500, 400, whatever it ended up. So, I mean, those two are the last two.
Right,
and
I don't know how much of that,
along the beach.
And most of that is
5,000
not
acres of upland, specifically upland, is quite a bit of land.
That's my point.
Pasture doesn't count.
Open conservation.
Pasture does not count.
No?
Pasture
does not count.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, why not?
Because it's not an upland area. You have to take the upland, you have to measure just
That's
the
what I'm saying. If
upland.
you take just that much upland, I doubt very seriously in the entire bond issue we bought that much upland.
I don't think. I mean, that's the way I consider
I
I would recommend we could go back to the 500 acres that staff originally proposed.
Consensus to go to 500 or?
I'm only one for 5, but I don't feel comfortable with those two last bonds.
We're not going to see the funding stream. It's just not going to happen.
I'm fine with 500.
Okay.
It holds into the
Commissioner Sorry?
nobility clause.
What's the nobility clause?
When you said it's a noble gesture.
Oh, yeah, definitely is.
Looking at 500 acres, at least we have something in there to set our sights with.
I could live with 500, but I would probably more go in Wesley's direction right now, or, just that much less government is better. But still, for me, I'd like somewhere, but this is probably the wrong spot, where we decide that we're friendly towards developments that want to come in and preserve upland acres through transfer of development rights or whatever, where you low density in one place. I mean, I like that, but I don't know if this is the right place to discuss it.
Bob, would that count as Commissioner Soy has outlined, if we have a new town?
Yes.
And that part of their open space requirement would go towards this?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think 500 is an attainable objective.
Well, what's our minimum size for a new town is 1,200?
Yeah, 1,200 east.
50% would be 600 right there.
Yes.
But again, it may not all be upland.
That's open
Depends upon how
space.
you-
Don't confuse uplands and open space.
Right, because the retention pond's open space.
Well, I've heard a couple 500s are okay, and I'm good with 500. I like keeping it in there just to have the objective, so I guess we have consensus to go to 500.
And we can always later on direct staff to try to do this through transfer of development rights or some other method which doesn't include county or other funds. That we do it through LDRs or whatever, not through purchase.
Okay. Mr. Butel?
Yeah, George Butel. How would this relate to new developments such as new affidavits of exemptions? How much, how do you quantify this with development coming in, a brand new development? I mean, how much are they supposed to put toward, let's say all of their property is upland type property. How much are they supposed to preserve? And let's say a citrus grove comes in for an affidavit of exemption, and how much are they supposed to put toward the upland preservation side? How do you do that?
Yeah, Bob, actually, we're going to be dealing with the
percentage
exemptions.
AOEs are probably exempt because they do have to do up.
Yes, and it's 15%.
For an affidavit of exemption, what are you exempting with the AOE then?
The physical infrastructure improvements. roads. Right.
So you
We'll
count,
get into that whole thing under the land.
Yes.
so you count that as part of the 500 acres. So every little development that came in, so that would count toward the 500 acres. Okay.
Correct. Okay. Is there any additional comments on this? All right, so Bob, it seemed like we had consensus to go with 500 and go ahead and move forward.
What about
The Scrub J plan?
Yeah.
I think what staff said, that having a countywide plan allows you to move forward, just like they did in Sebastian Highlands, where once they had the plan, that freed up all those lots. And I think, I think the folks in Vero Lake Estates would benefit. So instead of them coming in individually to pull a building permit and then get stopped, if we have this plan, then they'll be able to move forward.
And it's not the plan that concerns me, it's who's going to do the plan and exactly what does coordinate mean to the taxpayers of Indian River County.
Actually, we just got notification, I think on Friday, from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that they had applied for a grant to do a regional HCP, and they just got, I think, about 180,000, was it, Roland, in funding?
Yeah, we're actually took the initiative to coordinate with St. Lucie County to apply for a regional grant for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Section 6, and we got a couple $100,000 available through that program. So I think, again, this will be a regional approach. I think the benefit of it is it identifies the problem areas and the solve sites up front, so we can hit it off at the pass.
Any matching funds required for that?
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Are there
No,
any matching
no.
funds required for that?
No, not the grant that I was referring to. I think Fish and Wildlife sees it as a good thing from their perspective that it's all addressed up front as well. So
Yeah,
they're
and I
supporting
see this as a good thing for them to handle.
Okay. All right. Bob, before we move to the next element, it's 10:30. Why don't we go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 10:40. we'll go ahead and call the workshop back to order. Bob, we'll go ahead and pick up now at the potable water sub-element.
Mr. Chairman, the good news is there are only 2 more elements to go over. The bad news is these are the more controversial ones. The first of the last 2 elements is the potable water sub-element, and just want to point your attention to several new policies. One new policy stating that the county will coordinate with the city of Vero Beach and the town of Indian River Shores to provide a financial analysis of the possibility of consolidating utility services.
Great policy.
Are you for that one, Commissioner Floyd?
Absolutely.
All right.
You want that in bold?
You also saw that policy in the intergovernmental coordination element. A new policy requiring that all new subdivisions of 25 or more lots within a quarter mile of an existing reuse line connect to the reuse line, and we talked about that. That was in another element. A new policy to require the utilities to revise the utilities pricing plan to discourage excessive water use, and a new policy to require that water from retention ponds for irrigation, that water from retention ponds be used for irrigation. Also, there are several new policies regarding alternative water supply policies, and this is something that the state requires us to address. And these are policies specifying a time frame to identify alternative water supply options, to obtain permits, to construct the necessary infrastructure and actually get the construction done, and also some new policies regarding brine disposal relating to the South County RO plant. And again, time frames to identify alternatives, obtain permits, and complete construction. And that's the potable water.
Bob, are these dates the state mandated dates?
No, these are dates that I think utilities and the Utilities Advisory Committee feel comfortable with.
Okay. Any comments?
Yeah, just a question. When the EPA comes out with its basin management action plans, how is that going to impact these elements? So we're just going to have to go through them again to reflect the state, or how are they going to be handled?
Yeah, if any of the regulatory agencies make changes, we will have to go back and change the comp plan, yes.
Okay, so it'll be a comp plan change, not any. Okay, thanks.
Bob, can you go back to your first slide, please? Okay. Do we, on the excessive water use pricing plan, as utilities come up with a rough idea of what we're talking about there, or how restrictive will that be, or is that something going to develop?
That, and how do you know? If you're pulling county water, how do you know where it went?
Mike, it's that third bullet up there, the utilities pricing plan. That might not be in your bailiwick, so I don't know.
Don't have we would have to do a rate study, and it would come back to the Board of County Commissioners for approval. At this time, we haven't implemented it yet, so you'd have the final say. So any rate structure changes comes back to the Board of County Commissioners, and you can review it and make recommendations and changes as you see necessary.
I guess the only reason I'm asking is if we're doing a county-wide study with the city and the town based on the rates that are in place now, and then we're going to do something where we might be changing those rates the next week, it seems to me all that should be folded in at the same time.
I agree. I think that I agree with that.
Okay.
Our present rates do have a step ladder type structure. So if you get, we have excess volume charges for anybody that has, let's say you have 1 ERU reserved. If you start using over 13,000 gallons per month, you get charged at the rate of $8 per 1,000 gallons, as opposed to just the normal $2.35 per 1,000 gallon.
Okay, so it sounds like we already have that in place.
We already have that kind of base for conservation, encourages conservation.
Okay, and 13,000 is a lot of water for the average house to use, unless you're
typically you use around 7,600 gallons per month is what the average household uses.
How many?
Around 7,600 gallons per month, 250 gallons per day. Around 7,000 to 8,000 gallons per month is what the average household uses.
What's the base charge? About 3,000?
The base charge is, we have a base facilities charge, which is around $7.80 for water. And then we have, that's if you don't use anything. And then from 0 to 3,000, it's around $2 per thousand. And then we have another rate that goes from 3 to 7,000. And then from 7 to 13,000, and then over 13,000. So it kind of increases in a stepwise rate. And it really goes up after 13,000 over, it's right $7.80 per thousand gallons. Once you go over
This is actually the
13,000.
one that if we're going to have water conservation, that over time, working with the St. John's, we may change the pricing some in order to encourage the conservation. I think also that this is one of the ones that help actually give us some objective criteria which we can use later on. So it seems like it's consistent with conservation, but also with less regulation.
Well, and I think it would be equally interesting to, and I don't know whether it's even feasible for us to do it, but, FP&L has their rebates for conservation, for using appliances that are energy efficient.
Right.
It may be interesting for us to even have that as a policy in our utilities, a similar plan like that, if we can do it relatively easy, that if you install take your pick, a high efficiency washing machine, or, those things that really reduce the amount of water that we're using, that we give some kind of a rebate back on. That goes for the incentive side.
Yeah, we can ask St. John's, instead of spending $610,000 on irrigation, please to spend it on these type of.
Exactly.
Okay. And I like the policy of using the retention ponds for irrigation. I think that's well overdue, and seems a good use of that water. So
Yeah, that's water just normally goes out to tide that you're utilizing as a resource.
Commissioner Wheeler?
When they came out with the retention pond ordinances, it was to hold the water there for seeping back into the aquifer. But if you're going to start using it for irrigation, which I agree with you, I like that idea, but it seems like it's defeating the original intent or purpose of the retention pond.
No, the purpose of the retention pond was not for recharge. It was to keep stormwater from running off into the canals without it being treated.
Right, exactly.
Indirectly, it did what you're talking about, Gary.
Yeah.
But that's not the purpose. That was not why they,
That contained the flow on land. There's a metered flow into the canals.
But to utilize it for
I don't think
irrigation, you would be
scientifically they were
surcharging
trying
the
to
groundwater. You'd
Well,
be
the
doing
thing
same
is
thing
when you
you're talking about.
irrigate, you use an awful lot, lose a lot of that water in evaporation.
Right, especially if you don't do it during the early times of the day. If you do it during the early times of the day, you get a lot of recharge, as long as you don't do it in the middle of the day.
This is also going to help our VMAP in a way, because if this water goes back to irrigation to people's properties, then it's going to use some of the nitrogen and stuff that's going into the stormwater, as opposed to just eventually going down an overflow.
Right.
So a lot of these things are little tools which we can use, which it may not seem to be devised for this particular purpose.
I agree. Sometimes I get the feeling we kind of go in circles. It's like you go to a doctor and he gives you this medication, and then he needs to give you this medication to set off the bad of this medication and another medication to set. It's kind of like, we end up starting out somewhere and then making a complete circle.
Bob, the second bullet there, the 25 or more lots requirement, did we vest all that? Was there any big concerns from anybody in P&Z, or everybody's good on that one? Okay. Is there anyone from the audience that wishes to comment on this element? Mr. Butel?
I don't understand how you determined the water usage rates. With the economy like it is today, a lot of families are moving in to one household, which creates a lot more use from that for that particular house. And so, and it would be a burden on those people that are moving in together to pay higher utility rates while they were trying to move in and save on what their budgets are.
Yeah, actually, our rates were established back in 1999, and we haven't adjusted them since then. So they've been established for a really long time.
How do you do that? Based on square footage of the house, or how many bedrooms there are? How many
No, it's just
bathrooms?
basically one ERU per household, and every household has the same average usage. And they basically, the people that did the rate study looked at all the different houses around the county and they established a usage per household. Now, if you have a multifamily or a mobile home type usage, we give a 15% reduction for that. And so you get a little bit of an adjustment. You know, they have looked at that. They did a study on that back in 1999, and they adjusted those rates based on those types of usages.
Well, I think that a provision has to be made for families who are moving in together, and if they go over that 3,000 gallon capacity per month, I think a provision has to be made that you could present evidence to the county that so many people are living in your home and possibly get a reduction.
We have different uses. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple things with that one. One is probably the greatest amount of irrigation for most household, water use for most households is for irrigation, so they can taper the irrigation some if they want to and conserve that way. But more importantly for me is that if you start going down the road you're talking about, you're asking for a lot more government, and a lot more government than anybody wants. And how you monitor these things. I've had rental units, and sometimes people come in with extra people and you don't even know about it, but you also don't know when they leave. And so you can have people coming in on Monday and saying, well, we've got 6 people, I want this rate. And on Wednesday, they're gone. So again, the idea even of monitoring that is to me, a road we don't want to go. So again, if 4, 6, or 8 people come into a household, then let them compensate by shrinking the irrigation and letting some of their grass go brown. I mean, I would much rather leave this to the individual household.
Well, I agree with you that on irrigation, but there are a lot of people that don't use county water or city water for irrigation. It's just an idea I'm just throwing out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this element? Okay, and then Bob, your second slide, those dates, everybody was comfortable with. You said that those are achievable, and we're all set?
Yes.
Okay. Any comments on this page?
I said enough in the last one.
Okay. Looks good, then. We'll move on. Or, Ms. Eggert, did you want to speak? Or? No. You're good? Okay. All right.
One more element, and it's last for a reason. As you'd expect, the future land use element is where the most controversial policies are, and there's been a lot of time and effort spent on a lot of these issues. The first one I want to hit on is a new mixed-use plan development policy. Staff conducted 2 workshops on this, and several county commissioners and several planning and zoning commission members attended these workshops. The workshops were really good. We got a lot of the design community there, and we got a lot of good recommendations, and we made a number of changes to this policy as it evolved through the workshops and through the Planning and Zoning Commission process. Basically, I've put just the bare bones parts of the policy in here, but this policy would allow mixed-use plan development projects in most of the residential land use designation categories, L1, L2, M1, and M2. Basically, what this policy allows, it allows in those residential districts, a project that's in the L1 or L2 land use designation area can have 20% of its land area in commercial uses. For the M1 and M2, there can be 25% in commercial. And in both cases, there's an extra 5 percentage point bonus if there's vertical integration of the uses, which means either residential on top of retail commercial or office on top of retail commercial. The policy limits the types of commercial uses. Mostly it's retail, commercial, and office and services, those types of uses. The policy allows a 0.35 floor area ratio, which is a higher floor area ratio than is allowed generally in commercial areas. Again, it's kind of an incentive to encourage developers to do a mixed-use PV. The policy requires the integration of commercial and residential uses. The commercial and residential have to be tied together. They have to work. They have to complement each other. There needs to be good pedestrian and vehicular access between the two uses. It doesn't necessarily require residential over commercial. It can all be one story and still work as a mixed-use project. And there are also some timing requirements involved so that a developer doesn't come in and do just the commercial part and not do the residential part. And that was probably one of the most controversial aspects of this policy. This and some of the other policies here under the future land use element, you can spend hours and hours and hours talking about just these individual policies, and I want to inform you that we have already. and I think this is a good policy as it is, and it's changed. It evolved significantly over time, and I think it recommends it reflects changes and concessions, I think, on all parties' part.
Yeah, and before I go to the commissioners, I did sit in on both those workshops that we had, and staff did a fantastic job listening to the stakeholders, incorporating many of their suggestions. As Bob said, this has evolved quite a bit from what they first presented. And I really think it was an outstanding example of local government working with the community and making the changes and compromising and getting their input. So I want to congratulate Bob and Stan. I know they put a lot of work into it. We didn't, particularly the timing thing, I think some of the folks are still not entirely happy with, but I think staff had a very valid point and stuck to their gun there. So I just want to congratulate you guys. I thought this worked very well. Commissioner Wheeler?
Yeah, I just request for the listening audience that are listening to this on television at home, the first two bullets, go back and read them again, but state what L1, L2, M1, M2 areas are so people know what we're talking about.
And Bob, originally those were on some of the major roadways.
All the major roads.
That's still in there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And just to emphasize, L1 and L2 are the county's low-density residential land use designations. L1 allows residential up to 3 units per acre, and L2 allows residential up to 6 units per acre. And the M1 and M2 are the county's medium-density residential land use designations. M1 allows development up to 8 units per acre, and M2 up to 10 units per acre.
Okay, and one other question to follow up on that. Does this in any way, and I don't believe it does, but affects the new land use regulations we had concerning mobile home, or not mobile home, what is the...
That's a mobile home designation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not L1, L2, M1, M2.
No.
No, I realize. I just wanted to be clear.
It doesn't affect mobile homes at all.
But when you look at this, all these, it really means anything inside the urban service area that's along a major road has the opportunity to have this used. And that's basically the fastest way to summarize what we're doing here.
And the only other question I would have is, just as a thought, when we start allowing this, and I think it's a good plan, I like it, but when we start allowing this, we're expanding maybe the concept of the nodal system, except you're going to have like smaller neighborhood nodes where you're going to allow, is that correct, certain things that normally aren't allowed at this point?
Yes, but the nodes are still going to be there, and the nodes are going to be where someone who wants to do just commercial would go. Here, mixed use is a little more challenging for developers because a lot of developers focus on just one type of development, either residential or commercial. So while this policy will allow commercial outside of nodes, it still is it's a little more of a challenge to integrate the uses and come up with a good design, come up with something that works.
I think it's interesting when you say come up with a good design, because this is what they did in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s.
Right.
So I think it's interesting that
circle again, right?
Yeah.
Any other comments from the commissioners on this
Just have we, and I appreciate all the time being put in this, because this was something clearly we needed a policy for this. Now, with that being said, have we had the opportunity to see where they're trying to do some of this and where it's been successful? And along those lines, does it take the demographics of a large metropolitan area surrounding it in order for this to be successful?
We've looked at a lot of examples, and we had a design professional from Palm Beach County at the workshops, and he showed some examples. And I think you're exactly correct that it does take a larger metropolitan area and more density to get the vertical type of mixed-use integration, to get the residential over the commercial, the apartments over businesses. That probably won't work well in most of our areas, and that probably requires a larger, more urban area. In this case, though, we've looked at a number of examples where it's a horizontal type of integration between the commercial and residential, so it can work here, we're sure.
I think in the discussions, they said if they want to do residential over commercial at 3 floors, they lose money. If they go to a 4th floor, it's getting close to break even, and they don't make money until you get to the 5th floor. And a lot of that was due to elevator requirements and fire codes and all that kind of stuff. So we probably won't see a lot of, as Bob said, residential over commercial, but we will see commercial mixed with the residential areas as a mixed use.
And just real quick, it probably goes into LDR when you get the bonus, but what kind of bonus are you talking about for going vertical?
5 percentage points.
For each?
For commercial, it would go from 20% in L1 and L2 to 25% commercial. And in M1 and M2, it would go to 30% of the total area could be commercial if they do the vertical integration.
Greg, did P&Z have anything that they had a real heartburn here, or are you guys all in consensus on this?
No, as you saw, it was very cooperative, and I thought one of the best things that came from it was the interaction of the business community and the requests that they had, and I thought Bob and Stan did a very good job of not acquiescing, but to listening to their concerns and then producing a policy that would answer some of the concerns they had.
Okay, good. Is there anyone from the audience that would like to speak on this policy? Mr. Paladin?
Good morning. Joseph Paladin, President of Black Swan Consulting. My question is more on clarity. Would this apply to existing subdivisions that are already built? Bob, could we?
Maybe. And if
definite maybe.
A definite maybe. If the design requirements can be met, yes, it could apply.
For instance, if we had a subdivision that's already completed as far as infrastructure, and you've got 2 different zonings in that subdivision that are separated quite clearly. So if one part of that subdivision is being built out, but the other part hasn't been, could that apply to the part that isn't, as long as it's on a main road and as long as it meets the other criteria?
Yes, you could do a PD over that entire part of the subdivision, and assuming all the other criteria are met, yes, you can do it.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Beto?
As you know, I own 3 acres on the corner of State Road 60 and 74th Avenue. It's 3 acres in size, and I have the ability to use it. I think it's zone PRO. With regard to allowing me to use the property for commercial purposes, I think that my property would fit pretty much all the requirements that these other people are going to enjoy, except for the fact that when Indian River Life Care was built, let's go back, originally they owned that whole parcel, and they didn't, and that particular piece of 3 acres was designed to be built as a commercial piece of property, but at that time they didn't feel it was viable, and they abandoned it and sold it off. And it changed hands a couple of times until I got it. But it seems to me that is the use of commercial designation designed, and I wrote it down so I could get it right, to promote the viability of the development, or should it be designed to service the surrounding area, the people that are close in proximity to that? And I believe my particular piece of property fits that. It's pretty much 100% developed in the area. We do have a quite large sidewalk running down on the west side of 74th Avenue from Indian River Life Care and from the church, going right by our property. So it would be something that people could walk to from their development. And it doesn't have a road inside the development leading to the 3 acres, but they would not have to. They wouldn't have to get out on State Road 60 to enter or exit my particular piece of property. So I would like for the county commission at least to be able to consider this particular piece of property in that and give me as a lifelong resident of Indian River County the benefit of the doubt, along with those people that are coming from outside the county making an investment. I just would hope and pray that you would give one of your sons that live here and have reared a family that benefit of the doubt. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Davis?
Mr. Butel, what is the underlying zoning of your 3 acres?
It's PRO with the ability to put a...
That's a use. What is the underlying zoning?
That is the zoning, professional office.
All right, so it wouldn't even be eligible for this?
The land use designation is M1.
Okay.
There, so it would be eligible.
Right. Okay.
So it's pretty intense use of the property. And in addition to that, the county commissioners years ago granted the ability to put in a bank with 3 drive-up windows. So I just think it would fit the category, and I think it would be able to service those people that are in that vicinity to be able to use on my property without having to go too far.
Okay. If the land use is M1, then he could apply for a PD. He could put 25% commercial in there, but then he'd still have to build in some apartments or some townhomes or something to round it out. Okay.
Well, what I was thinking, I was like that to be put in along with what has already been developed surrounding my property, which is 100% developed already. So if it's a ratio of what's developed, I don't know how big Indian River Life Care is, but I'm sure it's over 50 acres, and the property that about which this whole thing occurred is only 20 acres, and that's on the east, on the west and south side of 66th Avenue and State Road 60. So they have 20 acres that they're thinking about developing, which this new classification would affect. Mine, it has 50 acres plus Village Green on the east side of 74th Avenue, and of course on the other corner is Point West, and that's a big development. I've got a light there, and it's it's very suitable for that use.
Mr. Chairman?
And
Mr. Butel, what do you think is the highest and best use for your piece of property?
Commercial.
What kind? I mean, I understand commercial, but I mean, what do you think would go best there?
Well, hairdressers, a little sandwich shop, Starbucks coffee.
That's good enough.
Telephone.
Something similar to what they have in front of the mall, then, almost.
Quite right.
Okay.
Quite right.
Right, so-
and maybe even small pharmacy out there.
His problem's been is it's the node.
Yeah,
There's
and that's
requirements
my
on
point.
distances you can't.
I'm getting into that next step, and so Bob, we have the policy that you can't expand or that you can't expand the node or you can't create a node, but you can't expand the node without doing the underlying density transfer that we did for Mr. Kennedy not too long ago. But in addition to that, you've got to be adjacent to, and across the road is not considered adjacent to. Not for the transfer.
And the zoning that's across the road is commercial zoning.
And that's
up
what
up to 5 acres. That particular.
Right, that's my concern. What do we do if we have, in our comp plan, when we developed this thing back whenever we did, when I say we, I'm talking about the people that came before us as commissioners and P&Z members. We have on the corner of State Road 60 and Range Line Road, 74th Avenue, right where he's talking about, we thought it wise to put a commercial designation there at one time. The person that owned the property didn't deem it the appropriate use for them, but yet we put it where they built Sealed Suite. Now, with that being the case, them putting Sealed Suite on there, making it more of a POI designation, they've taken away where our forefathers thought it was an appropriate place for a commercial designation. Now we have no commercial on the corner of 74th and State Road 60. And I think that really, if it wasn't Mr. Butel's property that been lifelong, I'm not taking that into account. I'm thinking that at a major intersection like that is a pretty much appropriate place for commercial development. I'll go out on a limb. And even if it is more of an intense than a POI, even a gas station would not be inappropriate right there, in my opinion. But yet our policy won't allow that. How can we structure the use of commercial properties for those individuals that do not want to use that property as commercial, but more as office, and allow some kind of remedy for the commercial use in an area that, in my opinion, should be a commercial usage?
Well, first of all, the policy provision that affects Mr. Butel's property is the separation distance between nodes. And even if Seal Suite wasn't across the street, the separation distance isn't met with the nodes to the east and the west. And I think it's a good policy. Otherwise, you wouldn't have, you'd have strip commercial all up and down State Road 60. That's what this is. Now the way this gets done is this mixed use policy. The mixed use policy is allowing really exceptions to the node policy, and it's doing it as an incentive. If someone can integrate it, if someone can make it a mixed-use development, he can have that there.
Let me ask you this. With what he's talking about already, though, it sounds like to me that the types of commercial uses that is in the mixed-use policy is not exactly what I would think of more of an intense commercial usage would be.
No, everything that he mentioned.
Everything so that he could do that on, if he went vertical, then he could do 30%. So that would give him roughly an acre.
Right, and if he could integrate with Indian River Estates, he could essentially use all of it. But I mean, that means actually them agreeing to have a connection through where their wall is.
That's what I was going to wonder. If he does the connection, then we would consider it integration, right?
And I'll go out on a limb. The chance of that happening is? Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. That's what I was thinking. But looking, my concern is our policy for commercial nodes is so restrictive. And I'm in favor of that because I think it really, the character of State Road 60 coming in, it looks a lot different than 192. We want to keep that. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But what you have is on the southwest corner, you have a commercial designation that's being used as an office that has taken away what the forefathers of this county said, we want commercial, or we don't want. We think it's appropriate for commercial to go there, but they didn't do it on all four corners. They did it in one spot because they didn't want too much of it. And now We don't have any in an area that's going to be a major intersection going north and south one day, and already one that's going to be, that is 6-lane going east and west.
The problem, Wesley, is the people at Seal Sweet recognize that, and they consider it additional value to their land. They've talked to George about doing this. I'm not really affiliated much anymore, but I know that he's talked to them about trying to swap it.
But you can't.
And they couldn't come to any terms themselves to even talk to the county about.
But I'm under the impression our policy, if they said yes,
I
would not
agree.
solve that.
I mean, it's handcuffed him severely, and we've never been able to make anything without an exception to any rule without creating precedents that we probably don't want.
But Mr. Hammer, from what I'm understanding, and somebody please correct me, if everybody agreed on both sides of the street, it still wouldn't happen in our ordinance.
Correct.
So that's my point. I mean, it makes sense to have the commercial there, but it's not Mr. Butel not getting along with Sealed Sweet or vice versa. If they put it all together in nice packaging came before y'all would be violating our ordinance.
I see.
So would we.
In the fact that that node or whatever whatever Seal Sweet has, it's up to 5 acres from, I think it's 2 acres to 5 acres. And they don't have even the 5 acres. So, I mean, there's excess capacity there.
No, and I understand that, but what I'm looking at the policy and trying not to look at the property necessarily, and looking at this, in my opinion, we have something here that somehow should be fixed, and I don't have the answer for it. All I can do is point out the flaws. And I wish I had a solution, but I guess now I'm asking for some help.
Commissioner Wheeler, did you have a...
No, I think before the nodes came in, both the corner to the east and the west there were commercial. I'm going by memory, but back in the 80s.
That's correct.
And I know why Village Green was changed. The piece they have on the other corner across the street going east, because it was sold as something else when they built that park as a park, and it was commercial. The other thing is how far outside of the distance between the nodes is this piece of property?
I think the distance requirement has an exception to go down to 9/10 of a mile, and it is closer than 9/10 of a mile. I think it's about 3/4 of a mile to the node to the west, 82nd, coming east from 82nd Avenue.
Yeah, the thing is, and I have seen us really, in my opinion, reach way out to expand nodes when they, on the surface, weren't expandable. We've just done one recently, and it's. I agree with Wesley, and I think that wasn't a major intersection 20-some years ago, but it is going to be a major intersection now when they. As is 66 up the street. And I don't want strip zoning, but you've got one piece of property there that could, I think, legitimately be used, even though we're going outside of our policy. I don't know if we can rewrite a policy. It's kind of what we went through a week or two ago with biodiesel. If you take the If you take the bio out of the ag, it's ag. If you take it out of the incorporated area, it's not ag, even though it's the same product. You guys are the planners, but it seems like that piece of property is not going to be used for anything unless it is commercial. I don't know what else you'd put there. Offices and stuff. It's too far out of the way and displaced, I think, to be.
I think what I'd like to see us do here, because we're getting into a specific parcel, and I'd like to keep moving on the elements here. So maybe what we need to do is the commissioners can talk with staff and Mr. Butel, and then one of us can put it on under our matters under a regular agenda item. But as far as a particular policy, Mr. Butel's property would fall under this particular policy.
Correct.
If he wanted to pursue this avenue. Obviously, I think he wants to go a different direction, but let's keep that for another day and keep working on the policy here.
Also, it's maybe it would be good to put in the plan and the policy is to encourage market forces to work instead of proletariat of people stating what could be done. In other words, that particular piece of property has sat there for 30 or 40 years, not being anything's being done with it because market forces precluded the fact, or zoning have precluded the fact. And I don't know, being a capitalistic free market society, I think that would maybe encourage businesses and job growth in the county. Thank you very much for your consideration.
George, you need that proletariat right now. I believe I'd say thank you.
And this policy is designed to be as an incentive. These are residentially zoned areas, residential land use areas, that as an incentive to the free market, we are encouraging or allowing some commercial to go in. So this is designed to be more friendly and give them more options and be an incentive. So
thank you.
I think the
Thank you very
policies-
much, and I appreciate the time that you've given this, and it is a very specific item. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Butel.
Commissioner, just a second. What Wesley was talking about, our policy, if this 20 acres that's being done as residential already owned the 3 acres that would be part of it, then he would be able to build out the 3 acres 100% commercial, because that 30% rule would fall into place. So if those two people were the same, we could do what he's asking to be done. Is that correct?
They would
Wesley,
have to open it up. They would have to breach the wall and create a connection.
Right. But if the same party owned it, they could do it. If separate parties owned it, they can't do it. I think that's what Wesley was, where he was going with that.
That's part of it. But really, my concern is where we decided commercial should be is not being utilized for commercial, and therefore the services in that portion of the county for commercial services is not there and can't be created there. And that's my
Right. We're putting the property acre on the 3 acres at a disadvantage because he hasn't owned the 20 acres. But in fact, if it's one owner,
that's a debate for another day. What I'm concerned about, and I almost would like to look at the property saying, okay, if we have a commercial in a node that's not being utilized, we put that commercial there for a purpose. So how do we make it so that somebody can utilize commercial to provide services to the residents around it?
well, I think the discussion we had at the meetings where you were at, Commissioner O'Brien, was that, you can't utilize the density or the build-out of the adjacent properties to say you warrant that being built. It has to be that one piece of property, I think, is where that's the discussion we had at that meeting.
Okay. Is there any other comments specific to this policy, Donna?
I have one question.
Just make sure you get the microphone, please.
Thank you. And Commissioner Wheeler voiced a concern, or I inferred that he had a concern, as how this applies to mobile home parks. Could you expand on that, please?
I just wanted to make sure that this didn't infringe on what we did a few years ago with making it extremely difficult for these mobile home developers to come in and evict everybody and then use their property under the mixed-use plan, which they could have done before for single-family, multifamily, et cetera. And, they sell a lifestyle when they sell these larger parks over 15 acres. And I just wanted it clear also, because I know there's interest in what we're doing here, and I just trying to avoid future questions if people understood what the M1, M2, and L1, L2 meant.
This does apply to mobile home parks, correct?
It does not apply to the mobile home residential park designated areas. Therefore,
the ones that we exempted in our policies.
We did an LDR that changed.
They're no longer designated M1 or M2. They're designated.
They're MH8.
It's a specific zoning now for mobile home rather than a mixed-use zoning.
All right, so the M1 and the M2 will not apply to this.
Right.
Because I had that.
Well, they got to be under 10 acres or something. I mean, we had a policy.
The mobile home parks we're talking about are no longer designated M1 or M2.
Right.
And so they'd have to get redesignated before they could even try
Which
to
would be a
apply
comp plan change, but they'd have to come back before us.
But I think, Donna, to answer your question, there are mobile home parks that are designated. They're just below that threshold that we changed the ordinance for back whenever.
Right. I think it's 15 acres.
Yeah, I thought it was 10 for some reason, but yeah.
I don't remember. It might be 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you are satisfied with the information that you've received? Okay.
Okay.
That's what thank you.
I just have one other question. is that 20% or 25%? Is that based on anything that can be built on the current zoning? And so using the current zoning, can I put in still 20 to 25% commercial?
If you can put in the residential with it.
No, I'm not talking about residential. If I have business offices, that's what the current zoning is. Can I put 20% or commercial in there because the business is there?
That's why it's the zoning of yours. Yep. That's exactly. Because he's got a commercial, a PORO.
Right, he can put in offices, but this would have to be a mixed-use residential and commercial. So he'd have to get a PD.
All right, let's, next policy, Bob.
All right, the next one is revisions to the county's new town policy that are proposed here. The way it's proposed, these are some of the highlights of the new town policy. New minimum acreage amounts, and that's 1,500 acres if a new town is east of 95, 4,000 acres minimum if it's west of 95. The policy limits the number of new towns to 2 east of 95 and 2 west of 95. The policy requires a mix of uses, and that's what's been in the policy. There's a new density allowance for the new town policy, and that's a density of 1.5 units per acre for the entire acreage, and with the possibility of another 0.5 unit per acre if density is transferred in. So that's an incentive to do a density transfer. The policy requires 50% open space in the entire Newtown area. 70% of that 50% has to be in green belts. All of the developed part of the new town has to be clustered in a compact area, and it has to be developed as a traditional neighborhood design type of project. There's one other policy I think we'll see in the future. Originally, staff was recommending no new towns in the AG3 area. That's the area west of the marsh, but that has since been removed, and new towns would be allowed in any of the land use designations, any of the ag land use designations.
Okay, questions for staff? Commissioner Wheeler?
One question, when we got into this with when we were looking at Liberty Park, which didn't pass, but it did pass.
It did pass.
But yeah,
no use support.
But my question would be, and I know that we tied the commercial end of it. We had to have X number of units in there before the commercial end could be developed. And I'd like to see a little more flexibility, and I don't know to what level, but I know they were talking about a Publix going in there, so we're talking hypothetically at this point. And I think to put something in like that, that services an area is a plus and not a negative, depending on what it is. I mean, there's a lot of population in that area, and if the commercial was allowed to develop a little quicker, it may help the whole area and also eliminate some traffic throughout the county, because people are traveling less of a distance to get where they need to go to buy groceries, just like the same philosophy we had with the bank down on Oslo and 27th.
And actually, Liberty Park is not a new town, but it's a kind of a variation of it. Pardon me?
Well, it's traditional neighborhood type.
Right, it is a TND. And actually, those conditions were put in as part of the planned development approval. They're not in the regulations.
Okay.
So what you can tailor that.
Flexibility.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Most of the land east of I-95 is Ag 1 at 1 unit per 5 acres.
Correct.
So we're given a pretty substantial density bonus to go up to 1.5 units per acre from the 1 unit per 5 acres. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Would it make more sense if we set the density at 1 unit per acre, but allow an additional 1 unit per acre for the transfer densities as a way to maybe encourage more of the transfer than just giving them a bonus up front?
What one of the things we looked at here was...
Sounds like a pretty good idea, Peter.
Sounds good to me, too.
Before they go too far away from it.
One of the things we're looking at here was the minimum threshold, really, to get a sufficient number of people. And we're looking, really, the 2 units per acre with a 1,500 acre size really gets you to that amount. It gets you to about a population of 6,000, between 6,000 and 7,000.
Make anything work like a public.
Yeah.
But as I understand the chairman's idea, it gets you the same number of people. It just actually helps further some of the other policies.
Right. And it would really take a lot more acreage, really, to get to that, is what we're saying.
Yeah, it'd be an additional cost to the developer because now he's having to buy 1 unit instead of just a half a unit. But, well, I'll keep thinking on that before we get to the final vote. Any other comments for staff on this policy? Bob, how many more policies do you have under the land use? Because we're running up to a little bit to a time crunch here, and we can take a lunch break and then come back if you still have quite a few more.
Not that many more.
Okay. All right. Any further on this policy? Anyone from the public have a comment on this? Yes, sir. Come up, please. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Peter Seed. I live at 180 Island Sanctuary, Indian River County. I've been asked by the Indian River County Neighborhood Association, Indian River Neighborhood Association, to speak on their behalf. Maybe it's the advantage that I've been out of the country for 2.5 months and start participating in this with a fresh viewpoint. I also suspect that the reason I was asked to comment is that I had the privilege of working with the city of Fellsmere in connection with their most recent comprehensive plan amendments, and I think initially I was viewed as the enemy, and by the end was recognized as a friend. And it is in that context that I approach you on this. And I draw from the experience I had in working with the city of Fellsmere. I think that this is a very important issue and one that needs to be put in context. I think that the analysis that the staff has put together has made reasonably clear that it is extremely unlikely and certainly not necessary that there will be a new town within the 20-year time horizon, simply because of the lack of need for such the housing component, and indeed even the commercial industrial. But that having been said, I certainly agree that there is an advantage to starting to take a look at this issue and to try to develop some parameters that will be useful guidance for the future. And the Indian River Neighborhood Association is particularly pleased with the transfer of development rights provision. We think that that is a huge step forward and one that I think augurs well for the future. But apropos of the issue that Commissioner O'Brien raised, it makes no sense to us to increase the original gross density, free density you might say, from 1 unit per acre to 1.5 units per acre, because that undercuts the incentive that we want to create for transfer of development rights. Through transfer of development rights, we can achieve the 2 units per acre, and indeed there's even a possibility of an additional bonus. And so we don't want to really undercut, which is, it seems to me, one of the most distinct advantages to the formation of this kind of new town. Now, my other major concern is that we have here potentially new towns east of I-95 and west of I-95. And it's so reminiscent of the concerns I expressed to the city of Fellsmere when originally they came up with what seemed to me a blank slate, where there really wasn't a degree of specificity to give us any real assurance that the goals of no sprawl, of preserving as much countryside as possible, of making it available and accessible to the residents, would in effect be achieved. You sort of had to rely on the goodwill of the governing body to, when it came time to go through the plan development process, that they would factor these issues in. Fortunately, the DCA was sympathetic to our point of view. And there was, as a result, in the comprehensive plan amendments, a much higher degree of specificity than we see here. And there certainly was a much higher degree of specificity than what is mandated by the requirements appear in a Flume amendment. And it is significant that as part of the amendment process, you had site-specific conditions that related specifically to this particular development of, my recollection, of over 22 square miles. So, I think it's terribly important that we recognize that some of these provisions need some important immediate tweaking, but that you really can't effectively address what should be in the comprehensive plan in terms of site-specific conditions until you know really where the devil this thing is going to be located. As you know, DCA has an incredibly important concern about show me that there will not be sprawl, show me that there will be energy conservation. And it simply is not enough to say we won't do sprawl and we will conserve energy. And so there were a lot of phasing mechanisms and specific provisions that were designed to assure that in fact the new town would be self-sufficient and would not grow disproportionately to the amount of housing that was being opened up, and that you went beyond simply light industry, and particularly given the distance, potential distance to the west of I-95, as to not only light industry, but heavy industry. And a strategically located employment activity center, therefore, was a critical component to the comprehensive plan amendments that were finally approved by DCA. So those are my overall concerns. Now, I have some specific. So I think my strongest recommendation is that we acknowledge that as a matter of reality, we cannot adequately address everything that should be in the comprehensive plan until we have a better notion of where, in fact, this is going to be located. If it is located east of I-95, access to existing employment opportunities may make more moot the question of whether we should attempt to make our little new town self-sufficient and allow it to draw upon the employment opportunities that are reasonably proximate to it. If it's an Ag 3, we clearly need a totally self-sufficient community, or else we will undercut tremendously the sprawl, leapfrog concerns and energy conservation concerns that the DCA has very appropriately expressed. So I think it's terribly important that the minimum modification that would be made to these provisions is a recognition that we are not only going to have changes to the flume, the map, but changes in terms of site-specific conditions that now take into account the topography, the location, the size, the boundaries, and all those issues which are of great concern in trying to make intelligent, comprehensive plan decisions. So that is our major suggestion. Now, there are some specifics, and I'll simply rattle them off quickly, and as simply illustrative of some of the concerns we have about the particular language that you have here. One is that the anchor tenant concept, which may be more than one depending upon the projected size of this new town, be lined up and established not during the initial stages of development, but at the time of application for a new town. A second important factor, which I've already mentioned, is that we should only allow a free density of 1 unit per acre so that we create an adequate incentive for the transfer of development rights, which will achieve the density expectations that Bob referred to. That there should be a recognition that heavy industry, particularly if this facility is located a significant distance to the west of I-95, be a critical component to this these general principles or guidelines that we're working on at this time. And even the donut concept troubles me a little bit. We shouldn't burn any bridges. In Fellsmere, the concept is, and I think it's a beautiful concept, that we will not try to squeeze together all of these high-density urban development into a single new town that would be disproportionately larger than even old Fellsmere, but that we should have a string of pearls of adequately sized villages and perhaps even some intervening hamlets that would not be so large as to defeat the purpose of providing the residents great access to the countryside. And donut sort of implies in my simple mind, you have this huge center, and then you sort of have a green belt around it that can be, since there's no limitation in these guidelines as to size, could be several miles distant for the residents instead of having it immediately accessible. So that is a concern I have. And also, there is some ambiguous language. You have the statement that these are to be small towns, yet there is no limitation on size. And I don't know, again, are you serious or are you not serious? Or what do you mean by small towns? And also, I appreciate that under the existing rules, you had pretty onerous condition that probably in all practical effect made impossible to go forward with the new town. And that was not the 1 acre per unit requirement as a free zoning, or 1 unit per acre, but the requirement that it be shown that the new town will capture 100% of neighborhood convenience and community shopping, and at least 50% of employment trips. That was knocked out. And those were pretty onerous requirements. And obviously they may make a lot less sense if it is indeed a small new town and it's to the east of I-95. But I do think that there still needs to be some reasonable alternative beyond what we have now to assure that we do in fact accomplish energy conservation and that we don't have urban sprawl and leapfrog development. And then finally, I might say that my passion is cycling, bicycling. And I dearly hope that not only in the new town, but also throughout your plan amendments, whenever you refer to a pedestrian sidewalk, you include the words bicycle. Bicycling now is critical for health, for energy conservation, for safety, a place where safety is of critical importance. Sidewalk, walk, is too limited a concept. And throughout this country, complete streets is a concept now that is very much in vogue and appreciated, and recognizes that pathways often shared with pedestrians, which is our case on A1A, for the elderly and for the young, are critical additional requirements that should always be not only in your element on recreation or wherever, or transportation, which I didn't have a chance to review, but also whenever you refer to the word sidewalk, please include bicycle pedestrian paths. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Seed. Gentlemen, I need to run to do the ceremony with the sheriff. We can either take a lunch break, or if it's the consensus here, I'll turn the gavel over to the vice chairman and he can continue the meeting. And
we have a guest. What do y'all want to do?
Let's see if we can continue with
Yeah,
that.
we're getting close to the end here.
We got to be close to the end.
What kind
Okay.
of time are you looking at, Bob?
Okay, that's fine. We'll just keep moving forward. I will go ahead and turn the gavel over to the vice chairman, and you all continue, and good luck with it, and I'll catch up with staff and what I missed.
Thank you, Peter. Where we are, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I certainly will. Okay, so you all continue, and I'll.
And I'm going to start my chairmanship with a 5-minute break, and we'll be back at just before noon. If we can go ahead, please, like to get the workshop back going. Bob, if you want to go ahead and begin the next slide.
Is your mic on, Bob? I can't.
It is, but I'll get closer. I want to start off softly and just say, you know. Exactly.
Mr. Chairman, I've got
to that.
Can I make one statement about this?
Sure. Go ahead, Sam.
Can I do that? Okay, I'll step up here. Otherwise, I've got a microphone. I feel a little bit funny. I listened very carefully to the last speaker and what he said, and it was a very well thought out argument. But frankly, I have a slightly different point of view about this, and it goes something like this. I think that the neighborhoods that we live in, and indeed probably the ones that, I don't know where Mr. Seed lives, but probably most of us are neighborhoods that are examples of what was largely done in the second half of the 20th century in America. They're suburban neighborhoods. Now, we have decided now, despite the fact that we all love the places we live in, that those are toxic. They're not energy efficient. They don't, they stretch our resources very wide. They don't conserve enough green space, and all of those things. And depending upon where you fall on the divide, probably politically and how you think about things, that may be true or it may not be true. But when I look at the TND, which is meant to be the best minds coming together, thinking about how we can create something better for the future. And I read through that thing very carefully, both as someone who cares deeply about Indian River County and also as someone who I think understands the economics of real estate development, seeing how I've done that for 20 years. There are things about that that I read in there that I'm unhappy with, and there are things that I also am quite pleased about. And so I would think that means for me that it's pretty well balanced. One of the things that I know is going to come up for conversation, which is why I asked to speak before I have to go to another appointment, unfortunately, is about the density credit transfer versus the 1.5. Now, when I look through that TND, I see it almost as a public-private partnership. The developer, you're allowing them to have the right to develop, and as a result, there's going to be some very significant rules, restrictions, and planning that is going to happen. Very significant. Everything from the color of the building, the facade of the building, the roof, where you're going to do stuff, how much open space there's going to be. I mean, it is quite different from anything that that developed in this county or probably most of the United States in the latter half of the 20th century. So it's really a private-public thing, and it involves much more work and much more cost and everything else on the front end. There has to be, if this is truly the way we want our cities and our counties to develop, there have to be some reasonable incentives to have a developer come in and say, I'm willing to go through this root canal. I'm willing to go through all of this. And frankly, it has to work financially anyway. It just has to pencil out, or we're just going to have more of what we now believe is toxic. More of the same kind of communities we've had and that we all live in. So starting with the fundamental decision that this is in fact the way we think we want to live and the way we want our towns to develop, if we agree with that, then I think it inevitably leads to the idea that we have to incentivize. And I believe this is a very modest incentive. Let me say that. I believe it's a 1.5 units per acre. And let's remember, most of it's going to be clustered in the center, and it's going to be a giant green space all around. Very modest. Now, the alternative to that, which is going to be discussed, is whether or not we should have density credits. I love the idea of density credits. Here's the problem with that as a strict either or. Maybe it can be an alternative. They cost money. The same way having less than 1.5 units per acre costs money to the developer, and then, that if you start making them pay for it, again, you're taking away the incentive. That's all you're doing. So if you want to take away the incentive, you could do it one of two ways. You could either say it's going to be 1 unit per acre, or you could say you're going to have to pay for the extra density. It's the same effect economically, and then I think you're right back to saying, you know what, I think we'll just keep developing things the way we've always done because it doesn't make sense financially for the developer to do it. He's not going to go through the root canal of having to sit down with these guys for probably a year to come up with a plan like this, a year and a half, 2 years. That's my comment.
Thank you. Anybody else on that portion of the plan? Mike, name and address for the record, please.
Mike Gray. I live at 440 Greystone Court Southwest. And I appreciate Sam standing up here and kind of preluding this in here. because it's absolutely true. There was a lot of time spent over a long period of time when we first brought this up several years ago, and worked with staff and Bob and Stan extensively on trying to develop something that has some kind of financial viability to it. If the economics of this presented an opportunity to come to pass in the future, what we all agreed to was kind of a compromise of a minimum of 2 units per acre as a minimum and maximum actually density at that point in time, to give these types of potential developments some kind of critical mass that allows that would give an incentive to commercial businesses to move into these types of developments. Anything less than that, we go back to Publix, for example. I believe that their business plan says that you have to have 5,000 rooftops before you go into a place to make it economically feasible for a Publix to operate in an area like that. Absent that, we could go out there and build one today and give them free rent, and they wouldn't go out there and shop because they couldn't make any money. So to me, I think what Sam is saying is true. If you simply draw up a plan that has no economic viability to it, then you deem it you make sure that it will fail, and the people who run the numbers and look at the math on these things will tell the owners who are looking at doing this that the math doesn't work and it will never happen. To me, this is kind of an underlying philosophy that the neighborhood association uses to begin with to stop all growth. If they were concerned personally about saving energy and orchestrating traffic properly, they might go back and resurrect putting a Publix over on the beach side and cut down all those people who have to come over to shop at the Publix on the land side and cut down on that traffic flow. But that said, I continue to support this Newtown concept. It's all about economics. It's all about at some time in the future, if the demand warranted it, certainly the people who would be involved with it would have to go through a lot of planning, a lot of pain and suffering, and to Sam's point, the root canal to get it done. But that would be up to them to determine if that's what they wanted to do and if the economics are viable. So personally, I would say that any density transfer at all that would be required to be acquired would be detrimental to doing these. Other than that, there's a lot of other details that we've already gone through in the past that if we needed to get involved with and discuss, we'd be more than happy to do so. But just off the top of my head and looking at this, having to buy density to make these things work dooms them to failure right out of the block. So, yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioners, Joseph Paladin, Black Swan Consulting. I'm going to confine my comments to the transfer of development rights, basically. I think that this is one of the reasons why I think that the development rights that we retire, that we buy from like the Sexton Ranch or the other one that we bought out far west, if that was put in a mitigation bank that the county controlled or the land acquisition committee or somebody like that, then we could do the same thing you're looking to do by acquiring this land. I could go with 1 unit per acre and then acquiring 1 unit per acre by using those development rights to sell off and then take that money instead of another bond issue. The county could use that money to acquire more land. Because in reality, if you look into the future, you're going to have to set aside more acreage than 5,000 acres for water supply and other things you're going to need in the future outside the urban service line. So this would be a way of letting 1 unit per acre go in, but then acquiring the other 1 unit per acre with those development rights and letting the county keep buying land over and over again without floating another bond issue, which isn't very popular right now. So I just think that maybe something like that should be looked into. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments before Bob continues? Okay, Bob.
3 policies I want to call your attention to. There are changes to these. First policy requires design guidelines for new residential plan developments. Planning and Zoning Commission's talked about this for the last couple of years. Another policy removes buffers between similar residential uses. That would mean you wouldn't have to have a buffer between a 3-unit per acre subdivision and another 3-unit per acre subdivision. And then the final policy I want to call attention to here is allowing traditional neighborhood design projects as administrative permit uses in multifamily districts. This essentially follows the concept that if something is good, like TNDs are good, you don't want to make it more difficult for them. So instead of being a special exception use, this policy would allow TNDs as administrative permit uses.
Any comments by the commissioners? P&Z? Audience? Next slide.
Wait. I tried to skip. I tried to skip over one pretty quick.
We're done.
As I told you, the Agricultural Advisory Committee had 2 meetings focusing solely on comp plan area-based amendments, and they probably spent about 6 hours, spent a lot of time, had real good policy discussions there. Let me just run down the way the ag-related policies are now and tell you some of the changes. Originally, staff had recommended, based on the EAR, that agricultural PDs have a minimum amount of common open space. Both the Ag Advisory Committee and the Planning and Zoning Commission didn't agree with that, so that is now out. There is no requirement for Ag PDs to have common open space. There's another policy that currently there's a policy in the comp plan that new development projects that are inside the urban service area have to provide a buffer if adjacent property is in active agriculture. Staff was recommending that that policy be removed and buffers only put on new development projects that were at the edge of the urban service area and abutted active agriculture. The Agriculture Advisory Committee recommended that policy, agreed with staff and recommended that buffers not be required within the urban service area. The Planning and Zoning Commission disagreed with the Ag Advisory Committee. So essentially the policy is not being changed from what it is now in the comp plan, and it does require buffers within the urban service area if a development project is abutting an active agricultural operation.
Let me address the common area before you ask your question, Gary. I know what's coming. The only reason for that is that you're not losing any open space. What you're losing is the ownership of the open space. You maintain your 80%, you have to have 80% open space just like we always have. What he wanted was to put in 30% of the property had to be owned like a common owners association or whatever. The feeling is that someone will take care of their own individual land better than an ownership of a common area, contiguous or not. So that it was, to me, and from an agricultural standpoint, it was a moot point. This was like an onerous something that was put in here to be taken care of, and you're not really gaining any more open space. You're not gaining any benefit other than, well, you're going to have 30% of the space that was owned in one spot. So it was really kind of shrinking the land down, and you couldn't, whereas at the same time you would own the land, whether it was 10 acres parcels, 2 acres, if you remember the changes that were made with the Ag PD when it went into Quail Ridge, I guess, they happened to put in 30 or 40%, maybe 50% common area where they did the uplands by choice. And that's the only project that's been done under this one rule, and the staff wanted to put in that common area for every project. And if you remember, the reason we changed the rules was to give them the flexibility of development where you didn't have like a cookie color PD. It was, you could have a 10-acre piece of property and a 1-acre piece of property, and you could design around the land. And the fact that it was common property did nothing except that it said all the landowners had to take care of that property. Whereas if it was chopped up individually, each individual person had to take care of it. You didn't really gain any benefit, in my thinking, open, still had the open space and the green space, but the caretaking, you're designating a different caretaker. It was the whole purpose, and I never could understand why anyone wanted that.
It wouldn't preclude them from having a common area.
You could do it. I mean, if the development, you had something like they did at Quail Ridge where they wanted it, have at it, but don't make them do that without having ever done another development.
In my mind, when we were looking at the Ag PDs, which the board unanimously supported, I thought there was opposition to that from staff and even Treasure Coast.
Right.
But it was kind of like, so you could have a common area, and maybe in my mind I was thinking the objective of an Ag PD is to have more property available for common use, maybe an equestrian center, fly-in ranches, things of that nature, golf course if they want it.
Right.
But that doesn't preclude any of that. It just doesn't say. But I wouldn't want to go in and do an Ag PD where basically there should be some objective, even if it's all put into conservation, whatever they want to do.
I agree,
with it.
but I mean it was kind of like we're pulling a number out. We started at 50, we negotiated to 30, and now we're going to say 20. There is no plan on the plan. So, I mean, what we need to do is, it's a PD, so we have say-so over it when it gets there anyway. Why lock it up on something? That was the whole purpose of it. I mean, we haven't done another one, so.
Okay.
That was all.
Thanks, George.
Any other commissioners?
On the buffering, real quick, the buffering between ag, the one thing that I wouldn't mind if we could do this, I think that if you're the landowner that's got a piece of property next to an old, potentially abandoned grove, depending on what you want to call it for tax purposes, if nothing else, maybe you could get some kind of sign-off from a landowner saying the buffer is not required, that it was going to be like property to like property. If not, then the buffers probably need to stay, because there is active agriculture that occurs in the county inside the urban service area that we need to continue to protect.
That's a good point, Bob. Has anybody addressed that? The difference of whether it's an active piece of agricultural property or an abandoned grove?
We addressed it. We couldn't figure out how to sign off on it, and so we left it.
Yeah, what's active and not active is difficult to deal with. The other thing is, I think there's a general agreement that pasture or grazing doesn't need to be buffered. It's citrus groves that need to be buffered. And really, most of the active ag inside the urban service area is really pasture, not active, well-maintained groves.
But if it's any other crop, that they have with it the same type of problems.
The other thing is quite frank, I think the Audubon people felt like that, buffering adds to bees, flowers, plants, it's habitat, and it doesn't hurt. It can be a little additional expense, but if you put buffering in and the guy next door develops and he had to put buffering in, I mean, what's the harm in having 50 feet of buffer instead of 25? I mean,
and this is still for the new towns, right? So if somebody
this is L1.
Okay, fine. Any comments from the audience on this one?
Again, Joseph Paladin. On the Ag PD in Quail Ridge, I represent that development. We had 50% open space at the time we brought it through, and as long as it's optional, I just don't see why I would object to it. But I think one of the ways we got to that is we had a maximum lot size that we were starting with at one time that actually Mr. Wheeler brought forth. We had a minimum size of an acre, but a maximum of 3.5 acres. So no matter how you look at it, you would have common area that you would have to account for. So that's how we got to a common area. But I think to do an Ag PT and not have common area, you're almost going back to the ranchette style development. So you're not really accomplishing anything. So I don't think market-wise you're going to be forced to do what we did in order to have something that's going to be viable. But that's how we came up with those numbers, Commissioner Solari.
Okay. What was the debate in the Ag Advisory Committee on Policy 6.4? Where did that wind up with the Ag Advisory Committee?
The Ag Advisory Committee voted to do away with the buffers, but put in a notification, a Right to Farm Act notification. When we brought that to the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission said, keep the buffers. So we're bringing it to you with the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation.
Is there any way to, and I missed that, that's why I thought it was different, and that's why I asked that question. I think that if we have these committees that we have vested so much time in to get their opinion, I'd like to know that whenever we're sitting here making these decisions, versus me having to ask what was the committee's decision.
Well, we're going to address that committee problem for you.
I appreciate that.
Sorry.
Thank
We'll
you.
work that problem. Any other comments?
Excuse me, wasn't this ag buffer originally in our land development regulations, but it was almost erroneously taken away when the Growth Awareness Committee added that 50-foot special buffer of the urban service line? It was an unintentional, really, we did not intend to remove that special buffer.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the Growth Awareness Committee.
The only addition I think that would make some sense is if there was a way for the landowner, if a developer's coming in next to it, to give him the opportunity, if the landowner would opt out of the buffer for him, would allow him to come in without a buffer. I think if the adjoining landowner could do that, but we don't have that in this policy.
Well, and the way to make that,
we could never come up with that. But
the way to make that happen would be, and I don't know that this is necessarily fair, but really the problem is this, or the dilemma is this, is as it goes along and as you get development inside the urban service area that is adjacent to an agricultural piece, you've got the buffer, then it abuts to somebody that didn't have to build a buffer as it comes in. And so the way to make this not be a problem is require both of them to have to build a buffer if one of them doesn't agree to do the buffer.
Right.
You understand? I mean, that way you've got as much burden on one side as you do on
we
the other
opted
side.
in favor of buffers because we didn't see where it's expensive, but we felt like it added to something, not hurt something. Inside there.
Right.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hammond, how does this affect the greening challenge?
It doesn't have any effect on it.
It really doesn't have an
No.
effect?
That's a whole different issue.
Too minimal of a distance?
Right.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Bob?
A few more agricultural policies. One is affidavit of exemption. Currently, the LDRs limit affidavit of exemptions to a maximum of 19 lots. Staff was recommending 8. That wasn't popular with the Agriculture Advisory Committee. And so both the Agriculture Advisory Committee and the P&Z recommend that affidavits of exemption have a 19 lot limit, not an 8. Another policy establishes specific density amounts for transfer of density from different types of agricultural property. And then the final policy allows small-scale biofuel processing plants as an accessory use in the AG2 and AG3 areas.
Any comments from the commissioners? P&Z? From the audience?
All right, we're almost there. Another policy that had a lot of discussion was a staff recommendation that all new development projects provide vehicular interconnectivity. There was a lot of discussion of that at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, and they recommended that this be revised to require only bicycle pedestrian interconnections with new projects. And that's how it's been changed now. So no required vehicular interconnectivity, but required bike ped interconnectivity.
Question.
Commissioner
Comment. I'd like to see the required vehicular connection. I think that as we grow and we build more and more 4 lanes and 6 lanes and more travel and no interconnectivity is a detriment to good solid growth and transportation. I think it smacks in the face of trying to be energy efficient, and it's just inefficient overall. And nobody wants anybody to drive through the neighborhood, but once it's established, it's not a big deal. The entire city of Vero Beach, Sebastian, all have interconnectivity. And when you get west of 43rd Avenue, you start running out of routes to get around. And you look at South Florida as a prime example of what I don't want to see Indian River County become. And you can live, 200 yards from your neighbor. If you want to drive your car there, you might have to go on 2 4 lanes and drive 5 miles to get over to his house. And so I would prefer to see the require vehicle interconnectivity in different developments.
Any other commissioners? My leaning is towards Commissioner Wheeler, but I'd like to hear from the P&Z.
I wouldn't say that it was a heated discussion, but there were certainly very clear values on both sides of the argument. I would like to have seen the allowance for professionals in the future to come up with methods of having vehicular interconnectivity, and mainly because of the reasons that Commissioner Wheeler has stated. And we have places right now where you have to get out on 26th Street and go out to 58th Avenue just to get a few yards into an area, a commercial area. So while we did finally agree on limiting it to non-vehicular traffic, I still think that there are methods that will be discerned in the future that should at least be considered. I know he hates a few terms associated with allowance and so on, but I still believe that this is something that we should allow to be considered in the future for all of the reasons that we've stated.
And the Planning and Zoning Commissioner that was really against having vehicular interconnection is not here, so you can all do what you want. The guy who didn't want it is not here.
Sam, and I was with Sam. The only reason being is that if you look at every development that we've had, most developments we see, this is not, inside the urban service area, there are very few areas that we felt like that you could even make this work because we're so developed down the road. By making it bicycle and pedestrian, we were trying to alleviate some of the problems because we think that they should be connected. I think we'd all like to see the vehicular connection. We couldn't figure out how you would make it work, in all candor. Number two is that to require it, which is what you're really asking, and it's a little bit like saying, don't use as much water in your house. We're going to become a greens, whatever. There's certain things that we tend to believe we can force and some things we can't force. And it seems that from the development that we have seen, good or bad, the reality of the markets, no one has wanted this. And that was our recognition was simply that this is not something anybody with gated communities they want, or they wouldn't be buying gated communities. If we could start over again in the new towns and maybe do this in a different area, I think it would make a lot of sense. None of us argue against it. It's just the reality is we didn't think we could make it work, and make it work well.
Dr. Cox?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Also, Sam made the point, and initially I didn't agree with Sam on this. I was supportive of the planner's position, which Gary articulated quite well. He made the additional point of the impact of routing traffic through small neighborhoods, and I think he made a pretty effective point that, with small kids out in the street, he really didn't want that potential for through traffic going through his residential areas, and he suspected the same was true of many other people. And so, there are two sides to this. And so, in your nearly infinite wisdom, you must balance them.
Gentlemen, you all are paid to do this. You can decide whatever you want.
We're obvious compromise, and that is, I agree with Commissioner Wheeler, vehicle interconnectivity, but I also urge that we require pedestrian bicycle interconnectivity the same way, and that, of course, would protect the children who would be on the bicycle pedestrian path. It seems to me you need them both.
I would, I'll wait until.
Again, Joseph Paladin, and I used to be a developer, and I've developed several
a lot of them around
developments in this area, and we've interconnected all of our new developments with any other developments that weren't already there. That's the only place I would draw the line. I think any development that goes in, you ought to provide interconnectivity for traffic, and just like you and Mr. Willard spoke. But I think where you put a new development up to a neighborhood that's been there 40 or 50 years, those people didn't buy into that when they had their development, when they bought their house there. I think to force them to connect to a new development, I think that's wrong. So I would draw the line there.
You would run into some problems perhaps with gated communities because maybe they can get in on one end, but they can't get out the other.
Right.
But, we are building 4 lanes, and we have on the, and we're turning the community into what I don't want to say, a South Florida community. The other thing is I've been driving south on I-95 for 40 years, off and on. And if the multi-million-dollar houses in some cases existed when they built I-95, they would have fought I-95. But those houses, 500,000, 600, they went in next to I-95 after the fact. And I think on the surface, one, people don't like change. And I know my position is not popular with neighborhoods. But the bottom line is you've got to have interconnectivity for emergency vehicles, for all the reasons I stated earlier, to keep this from going like South Florida. And it also, kids are on main roads, a lot of traffic. If it's a neighborhood, I'm not talking about connecting through one neighborhood going from 66, for instance, if they develop something from 66th Street to 58th Street. You've got main streets that go there, and people aren't going to cut through a neighborhood very often. They're going to take the main thoroughfares where they can. But you need that interconnectivity for neighborhoods to be connected, I guess. It's ridiculous.
If you remember that when they put in Walmart, you got 53rd? Is that the street that comes off 26th?
Yeah.
That we backtracked and put actually speed bumps in.
50th. That's 50th.
Because people were cutting through. I mean, I understand. I mean, I think most of us do understand the fact that we need to finish the grid. Our grid is chopped up at best, and so it's a catch. It's a tough decision. But the question is if you're going to do this, how do you do it, or can you do it where you interconnect where it's possible? I mean, if you've got 3 gated communities together and you're the last 10 acres next to it, how do you force them to, so I guess there's a measure of judgment we'd all like to have. And
always going to be. I can tell you that this commission and other commissions that I've sat on have consistently given direction to staff that we want interconnectivity.
Right.
And then when a neighborhood comes in and complains, at least 3 members of the commission, whoever they may be,
we're out of here,
yield, and we don't have interconnectivity. And if it was in here, and there's got to, I think just by design or just by necessity, there's got to be some flexibility. But I'd really like to see this stay in.
For Mr. Hanna's question, we might be able to just put in, instead of unless physical constraints, we're practical.
We're practical and fiscal constraints.
I'm for the connectivity, and this is a little bit out of context, but when we talk in the MPO, no city, almost anybody wants any more roads. And I probably I'm actually one of the few believers who actually believes you can actually build a good 4-lane road, and I believe we need some. But with that, I'm a minority. So the question is, how do we get around? So, given that the consensus of the community seems to be against roads, I'm more for connectivity and also the bicycle pedestrian connectivity. Jens.
With the advance of gated communities, I guess the real reason is security. People want to feel more secure. They feel like they're less prone to have criminal activity. With having a former sheriff here, it'd be interesting to know whether he has the information or not. If you took the area, say, from the high school to the airport, and maybe the railroad tracks to 43rd Avenue, tough area, or cut it back down, 20th Avenue, 27th, the kind of original Vero area, is the crime rate any higher there than in any gated community? Or is the gated communities less across the board?
I don't know the stats on that, but I can tell you that there is a false sense of security with gated communities. It keeps vehicle traffic out. Someone has to go in. In fact, they're less likely to get caught in a gated community because the police aren't patrolling it. So, it's a false sense, but we all deal with perception and make decisions based on that rather than really what fact may be. So, but the important thing is we're a community, and people have to get around, and we should be connected.
I'll ask if any other comments from the commissioners. This one we may have to leave open until we have 5 men on the board. So move on to the next one.
Sorry, Peter will agree with me. George.
How is the upkeep going to be paid on a private road? Who's going to pay for that? The residents inside the development going to pay for the private road upkeep?
That's why they say where it's got to be is practical.
Well, and there's a lot of other things that you have to do that, you didn't have to do 20 years ago, too. I mean, it may be part of the cost of doing business. Right. For the developer, and the people that moving into that neighborhood are going to pay for that cost like everything else, whether you want water or sewer or paved roads or et cetera.
Mr. Chairman, that was the last policy that I wanted to highlight.
Okay.
Can I just go ahead and articulate the next steps?
Yeah, if I can just tell you the next step. Right now, it's going to be either May 11th or May 18th. The public hearing for transmitting the ear-based amendments to Department of Community Affairs will be held by the Board of County Commissioners. After that, the staff will make any changes that were directed to by the board and send the ear-based amendments to DCA. DCA will review and send back what's called an ORC, Objections, Recommendations, and Comments report. Staff will then address any objections that DCA has, and we anticipate in probably earlier mid-August the ear-based amendments will be presented to the Board of County Commissioners at a public hearing for final adoption.
Thank you. I'll go backwards this time and ask if there are any wrap-up comments from the audience. Mr. Butel.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, Ms. Kai's challenged me to come up with a phrase concerning the high cost of utilities for county residents using city utilities, city electric. And I did come up with it, and it says that Indian River County encourages all municipalities to seek out and implement strategies to keep and encourage the lowest cost of utilities while providing good service to its residents. So that's a policy that can be monitored. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else from the audience? Name and address, please, Bob.
Robert Adair, 7060 33rd Street, Chairman of Ag Advisory Committee. I just want to address some of the comments that Commissioner Davis had. Is that Donna is absolutely correct about the special buffers. There was a lot of work that was put in to establish those buffers to help preserve active agricultural operations inside the urban service area. And I believe, Mr. Paladin is not here, but when the Growth Awareness Committee did look at that, there was an inadvertent omission of internal buffers between active ag and possibly a new division. And so what it is that you want to be careful that when you put a new development into an existing active ag, that you have somewhat of a setback where you could literally have a sprayer within 30 or 40 feet of somebody's back door. Yeah. So the Agriculture Advisory Committee had two of our members that weren't there, Sean Sexton and Ray Smith, who are familiar with those things. And I believe that issue didn't come before them about the history. So I think that came forward at the P&Z, and I think that it was a unanimous decision to do that. And I wanted to say that also inside the urban service area, not including the Fellsmere annexation, is that a fourth of that land is in citrus, and that there's other poultry, bees, fish, and rabbit-type agricultural operations, and also organic operations are concerned about spray from the new development possibly jeopardizing their organic status. So if you really want to preserve active ag inside your urban service area and help keep those small producers in business, this buffer is really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Anybody else from the audience?
I just can't help but think that, and if that ag land ever comes into development, they ought to have to put a buffer up next to their neighbors because the neighbors expecting an open space next to them. So that kind of has that knife cut both ways on the expense for both of them.
And most active citrus now does have the wind breaks and that type of thing, but this just really makes it easier for both lifestyles. Yeah.
Anybody from the P&Z have any wrap-up comments? George, you look anxious.
Good night.
I would like to make a comment. I want to compliment Bob and Stan and their staff for the outstanding job I believe they did of presenting the material, and to the P&Z commissioners who have laboriously worked on this process. We've been working on it for over a year, I believe, And there's quite a few pages of material that they've looked at in making the presentation to the commission. I want to compliment them for their hard work.
And I know Chairman O'Brien would like to thank the P&Z for all their work in this, and also staff. This was a great job. The documents, I'll use a visual. These are the elements of this thing, and only part of it, and it's a rather tremendous job going through this. Just organizationally staying on top of it was a good job by Mr. Keating. I don't know if Sasan can get, it's almost, what Sasan is holding is almost twice as thick for the benefit of the TV audience. Any last comments from the commissioners?
Yes, just real quick, Bob, and I don't need it for today, but whenever we come forward with some of the changes, I'd like an illustration about how, remember the deed restrictions and the affidavit of exemption? I need to get with you to figure how.
On the host plants?
Yes, we stopped short of deed restrictions, but I want to find out in more practical terms how that release of restriction would happen. In my mind, it's still a little bit vague, and I'm not sure that it's going to work just yet. But so I'll get with you on that if you'll remind me. And with that said, y'all did spend a lot of time. Our committees also, not just the P&Z, but I know the Ag Advisory Committee and several other committees put a lot of time coming forth in this. So that's it.
Last chance for comments. Commissioner Wheeler?
I just want to add to the accolades, obviously staff, but P&Z, and even with other members, our Planning and Zoning Commission, I've always been extremely impressed with the volunteer work you do, the in-depth studying and background you do. It's really, I watch the DVDs, particularly on controversial items, and benefit greatly from the questions, the dialogue, and your work. And I'll tell you, P&Z is just an outstanding committee with a lot of intelligent people and hard-working volunteers.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Last chance. Adjourned. Thank you.